Tonight, the vice presidential candidates take center stage.
Republican J.D. Vance facing off with Democrat Tim Walz for the first time.
And it might be the last debate before voters head to the polls.
Our special coverage starts right now.
A critical showdown just 5 weeks from Election Day.
Ohio Senator J.D. Vance and Minnesota Governor Tim Walz taking on each other for the first time.
Let's get to work in Washington, D.C. When we fight, we win!
The candidates have been crisscrossing the country in the final sprint as polls show an extremely tight race.
But can they make the case for their running mates and prove to Americans that they're ready to be a heartbeat away from the presidency?
From NBC News, here are Lester Holt and Savannah Guthrie.
Good evening and welcome to our special coverage of the first and only vice presidential debate before the general election, which is now just 35 days away.
And we're just moments away now from that historic debate. Ohio Republican Senator J.D. Vance and Minnesota Democratic Governor Tim Walz facing off in front of the American people.
Tonight's showdown will be held in New York City, and as mentioned, it's potentially the last debate we will see before Election Day.
It's also perhaps the best chance for Vance and Walz to introduce themselves to the country and to try to shake up this tight race between their running mates Donald Trump and Kamala Harris.
The debate also comes as the U.S. grapples with crises at home and abroad, including the search for the missing after more than 150 people were killed by Hurricane Helene's impact, and fears of an all-out war in the Middle East after Iran launched nearly 200 ballistic missiles at Israel earlier today.
It is a busy news evening. We want to start with NBC News international correspondent Raf Sanchez with the latest. He's in Israel's northern border with Lebanon at this hour. Raf, good evening to you.
Savannah, Lester, good evening. We came here looking for signs of Israel's ground offensive against Hezbollah in southern Lebanon, which is just the other side of that mountain ridge. Instead, we found ourselves staring up at a night sky filled with Iranian ballistic missiles. The Israeli military says 180 missiles were fired in total. They sent millions of people running to bomb shelters. These missiles coming in 2 waves and taking just 11 minutes to fly from Iran to Israeli airspace. Israeli forces scrambling to intercept them with a big assist from U.S. naval destroyers positioned in the Middle East. The Pentagon says they played a role in protecting the skies over Israel tonight, almost miraculously. Even though some of those missiles did break through Israeli air defenses, Israel's government is saying there are no reports of any fatalities or serious injuries among its citizens. One Palestinian man was killed in the occupied West Bank, but that sense of relief undermined by a mass shooting in Tel Aviv. Israeli police saying 2 terrorists opening fire on the light rail there, killing at least 6 people. Palestinian Islamic Jihad claiming responsibility for that attack. Now, Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu in a late-night address to his country saying the Iranian missile attack is over and vowing to retaliate against Iran for this second set of missile strikes in just 5 months. The decision that he and other senior Israeli leaders make in the coming hours may decide whether or not this region hurtles further towards all-out war. Savannah, Lester.
All right, Raf, thank you very much.
And here at home, there's that urgent search underway to find the missing after more than 150 people were killed by Hurricane Helene's impact. NBC's Sam Brock is on the ground in hard-hit North Carolina, just outside Asheville.
Yeah, Lester, Savannah, good evening. That is a number, 151 fatalities, Lester, that just continues to climb. I'm standing in one of these remote towns that we really have not had much of a perspective on until now, guys, because the interstates were closed, but I-20 just opened up. I'm in Swannanoa. Looking around right now, I spoke with a man who described this in terms of the impacts as sort of a combination between what it looks like after a hurricane, a flood event, and an earthquake. Over my shoulder, and I know it's dark, that is a car that has been tilted up vertically from rush rushing water. The water line on the back of this house is about 7 or 8 feet. There are buckled roads behind me just down the street here that look like an earthquake ruptured the cement. So Lester, Savannah, you can understand why now we're looking at a death toll that has risen in this county from 40 to 57. Again, 151 and counting throughout the region. In terms of what I have seen personally on the ground, supplies were flowing again today, but the water crisis, guys, is real. I had a conversation with parents who said they were just hoping to get water to make oatmeal for their child. I spoke with a woman whose father is on dialysis. She was in her car charging the oxygen machine while also waiting to try and go and get groceries. There are so many folks out there right now that just cannot access information because they can't get online or they can't access social media. That has been a true problem as well. FEMA, the agency, came out today and said they have somewhere in the neighborhood of 3,500 personnel across the region. So that's 6 different states, 1,200 search and urban rescue folks, 2 million liters of water disseminated, 1.9 million meals. But the reality in Western North Carolina here tonight is people want to know, where was this on Monday? It took 48 hours at least to get water moving, some of these meals moving, and why can't you reach some of these super mountainous regions? We know how difficult the topography is. Lastly, President Biden is going to be out here by air tomorrow to tour the damage, to tour this zone. He certainly doesn't want to take away resources, he says, but is committed to helping restore these communities as long as it takes. Lester and Savannah, back to you.
Truly desperate times. Sam Brock, thanks for bringing us that.
A snapshot of just some of the issues at home and abroad that will animate tonight's debate between the vice presidential nominees, and that is what we're here to cover. It's going to start in less than an hour now. We want to turn to meet the press moderator, Kristen Welker, and our senior Washington correspondent, Hallie Jackson. So let's talk about it. And Kristen, why don't you start and kind of set the scene for us, where we are in this political race, 35 days away, I think Lester said. It's getting close. It's very tight.
It's very tight, and this debate is going to be a significant data point. Why? Because there is, at this point in time, no second debate scheduled between former President Trump and Vice President Kamala Harris. So I think this vice presidential debate takes on new meaning, and it does come against the backdrop of all of these issues, the intensifying issues in Iran and tensions in Iran, as well as, of course, what Sam was just reporting on, the devastation in the wake of Helene, not to mention, of course, the dock strike. So this is a real commander-in-chief test. Right now, Vice President Kamala Harris gets higher marks when it comes to who's the stronger commander-in-chief. But again, she's 1 point ahead of former President Trump. So here, their attack dogs are going to be front and center trying to make the case. Think about tonight as the beginning of the closing arguments in this campaign.
And Hallie, to play on that point, no further debates. That means these number twos essentially get not the final word, but they get a big piece of the final word.
Well, maybe the final word with an audience this big, Lester and Savannah, because think about it. Even last cycle's single vice presidential debate had more eyeballs on it than either of the conventions this year. So this is a huge platform. It is a huge stage. And there's a lot riding on it for both of these candidates, considering that if you look at the debate stage, one of the candidates there, Tim Walz, has the highest favorability rating of anybody on the tickets. J.D. Vance, the senator from Ohio, has the lowest. So in some ways, while they've been on the ticket for months, this is their introduction to America in a really big way. I'm going to be looking to see how Governor Walz parries what are expected to be some attacks on his progressive record as governor of Minnesota. The Trump campaign has previewed that that is likely a line that they will push, along with how he handles some of the imprecise language that he used around, for example, his military service and record. For Senator Vance, going to be looking for how he responds to the questions that have been raised about his previous comments about former President Trump, about Project 2025, for example, and about a new line of attack that you're seeing the Harris campaign really hit harder, which is former President Trump's age and fitness for office. Sound familiar? This was an issue, of course, that President Biden faced when he was on the ticket. The Harris team is trying to make this a thing, if you will, for Donald Trump.
All right, our senior national correspondent Tom Yamas is in the spin room near where the debate will take place. Tom, what can we expect?
All right, good evening, Lester. We are in the spin room tonight where there may be big surprises. You may remember Team Biden took some time to get to the spin room after their first debate in Atlanta, which ultimately ended the president's campaign. And then after a tough debate for former President Trump, he actually entered the spin room in Philadelphia. Here's what we do know about tonight's debate. It's being held in New York City, not exactly a battleground, but we expect this debate to be fiery nonetheless. There will be lights in front of each candidate to indicate how much time they have left to speak. The candidates will also each have a countdown clock. The debate will be 90 minutes with 2 breaks. There will be no opening statements. Each candidate will be given 2 minutes to answer questions with 2-minute responses from the other candidate. If needed, 1-minute rebuttals. Moderators can give additional time if they feel it is warranted. Governor Walz will give the first closing statement, followed by Senator Vance, who won a coin toss and chose to go last. There will be no audience in the hall, but here is a key change tonight. The mics will be unmuted. Remember, they've been muted for the last 2 debates, which Democrats thought gave former President Trump an advantage. But mics can still be muted if things get out of control. The moderators will do that. Candidates will not be allowed to interact with staff during those 2 breaks, and candidates are not allowed to have props or pre-written notes. They will be given a pen, a pad of paper, and a water bottle. So the big question tonight, will there be fact checks? The answer is sort of. CBS says the moderators are focused on encouraging exchanges between the candidates rather than fact-checking. They will have something up on their site, but of course we do that every debate. We're going to have something on our site as well, fact-checking in real time on NBCnews.com. Guys, back to you.
All right, that sets us up nicely for Garrett Haake, who covers the Trump campaign. He joins us also from the spin room, a very tight spin room, so everybody's right next to each other in there. Garrett, what are you expecting? What is the Trump campaign signaling tonight?
Well, Savannah, I covered J.D. Vance on Capitol Hill. I've covered him on the campaign trail, and I can tell you he is very comfortable mixing it up with reporters. He's comfortable with the back and forth and taking questions. He doesn't have a lot of traditional debate experience, but he's good with the kind of give and take and the kind of parrying that you might see in a debate with this format with the mics open. I also expect him to come out aggressive. I interviewed Donald Trump earlier today, but when I asked him what he wanted to see from Vance, how he would describe victory, he told me he expected to see Vance try to expose Tim Walz and Kamala Harris on the issue of the border specifically. That has been the animating issue for Donald Trump going all the way back to 2015. It's something he wants to see from his running mate here tonight. Vance, on the campaign trail, has been very comfortable in that traditional attack dog role. I don't expect to see much different tonight. You know, Hallie mentioned those favorability numbers with Vance being underwater. The Trump senior advisor said to me some number of weeks ago now that when this race is over, they expect all of these candidates to be unpopular. I think you're not going to see J.D. Vance necessarily try to reinvent himself on this stage. I think you're going to see him go pretty aggressively at Tim Walz and primarily at Kamala Harris throughout the course of the night.
All right, Garrett, thank you.
And for more on what to expect, let's bring in Jason Miller. He's a senior advisor to the Trump-Vance campaign. Great to have you here. Talk about the mission that J.D. Vance has tonight. Is it a rather narrow mission?
Well, J.D. Vance is going to remind people that we had a great economy under President Trump, and that's something that President Trump can bring back literally on day one. He can start getting that back in order. And the other thing President Trump can do on day one is secure our southern border, something that's been completely out of control. But we're going to see really a contrast of ideas, but I think the high bar is set for Tim Walz. I'm going to tell you why. Not only does he have to defend his own record, which is a bit bumpy, he has to defend Kamala Harris's record as DA, AG, Senator, Vice President. There's a lot there. But also Tim Walz has to defend Joe Biden's record. Joe Biden is the one who's been leading the Democrat ticket over the past 3.5 years. Now, we know a lot of the items have been on Kamala Harris's plate, such as being the border czar, being the deciding vote for 2 of these massive spending bills. But this is really a direction. Do you want to get our economy and get our border back on track? You want to keep going in the dangerous direction that we're going right now? J.D. Vance is going to remind people that there is hope, and that's President Trump.
Do you think that J.D. Vance has any work to do, Jason, that with this issue of likability? I mean, we mentioned in our poll since 1988, he's the second least popular, has the highest negative ratings of any vice presidential candidate. With suburban women in particular, he's got a net negative 21 with suburban women. Do you think he needs to take on some of this baggage, you know, the childless cat lady and all that kind of thing? Is that part of what you hope he addresses tonight?
Is J.D. Vance talks about his upbringing, the humble upbringing he had. Everybody knows from Hillbilly Elegy that his grandmother largely raised him. His own mother struggled with addiction. He's someone who went and served in the Marines, was served overseas as well. He has a great story, and he is able to get out there and talk with voters and tell that story. Then I think they're going to move his direction. Keep in mind, not everybody watched the political conventions. Not everybody saw Tim Walz of the Democrats or J.D. Vance of the Republican. So for many voters. This will be the first time that they're really hearing from these candidates. J.D. Vance also, he's probably the best communicator at pushing President Trump's message outside of President Trump. He's doing 2-3 Sunday shows every week. I think this is also something where it could catch up with Tim Walz. They've been playing the Washington Post had a headline this afternoon saying it was the Bubble Boy campaign. Well, now he's in the bright lights, and we'll see how Tim Walz does.
In that same vein, we've seen former President Trump get very personal in this final stretch of the campaign, calling Kamala Harris a mentally ill. Do you think that J.D. Vance will channel some of that negative personal material tonight?
I think J.D. Vance is going to really talk about the issues that are impacting the country, and I think he's going to call out some of the inaccuracies that we've seen from Tim Walz, from Kamala Harris, haven't exactly been truthful on the campaign trail. And I'll tell you, Lester, as I was watching one of Tim Walz's debates earlier today, he had this great line in one of his previous debates where he said, "I'm not going to raise your taxes, I'm just going to roll back the tax cuts." Tim Walz can lie through his teeth, but when J.D. Vance starts talking about the economy, how he's going to help everyday people, it's really something that's magical. I think J.D. Vance will do well tonight. I think he'll represent President Trump well. And again, Americans who are struggling to get by or wondering why we have this chaos, there's going to be hope. J.D. Vance can restore that hope.
Jason Miller, thank you.
No, before we let him go, we have to ask him, do you think that President Trump will debate again, Jason? He said no, but people can change their minds.
Well, as of right now, I would say no. As of this moment, this will be the final debate that we see. President Trump's done very well so far in the debates, and I think tonight J.D. Vance will do very well also. Although, again, Tim Walz, he's tough. He's been doing this for 2 decades. He's been in office for 20 years. J.D.'s only been in office for 2 years. So Tim's a professional at this, but J.D. Vance is going to do well.
Okay. Well, just so you know, your boss, Donald Trump, called Walz a total moron last night. So he apparently doesn't think as highly as you do of Tim Walz, but we'll continue to cover it. Yeah. Everyone is doing their expectation setting.
No, but when we talk about the issues, when President Trump is making those types of criticisms, he's pointing out the fact that we've allowed 20+ million illegals into this country. And, the language might be tough. Some people might push back and say that's not their cup of tea. But how does Tim Walz stand on that stage tonight and explain why Kamala Harris allowed 20 million illegals into this country? How does Tim Walz stand on that stage and explain why Kamala Harris had these 2 deciding votes that ultimately led to this record or near record inflation? We have to call out these tough issues. Too many people are struggling. This isn't time for powder puff football. We're going to get right down to it.
Yeah. By the way, the former president was talking about his debating skills. Said when he's going up against a moron, a total moron. So that was the issue. Anyway, Jason Miller, thank you so much. We'll see you later. Appreciate it. All right, let's bring in our chief White House correspondent, Peter Alexander, who's covering the Harris campaign. So, Peter, what are they signaling about tonight?
Well, it's a good question. As we've been speaking to those people close to Tim Walz, among the things I've heard is his priorities this evening, top among them all, will be to help amplify the case on behalf of Kamala Harris. This is as much about Kamala Harris in the eyes of Tim Walz as it will be about Donald Trump and J.D. Vance, according to those people who are close to his campaign. Notably, this is the first time that these two will ever be in person, J.D. Vance and Tim Walz. It does have the potential for some fireworks. They've been sniping, as we've witnessed for months, but mostly from a distance. Now, for the first time, they get to do it in that traditional running mate role as the attack dog. And one key voter group that I'm told both campaigns have been targeting is men, with Vance and Walz at the forefront of that fight. Walz, of course, the former high school football coach. He's a hunter, a plain-spoken Midwestern dad. Vance, who would be the youngest VP to serve in decades, he's really tried to frame his messaging toward younger guys. It's a place to watch. And as you watch tonight, recognize most Americans who haven't made their mind up yet, and that is a limited sliver of the American electorate right now. Even if they're not watching tonight, the campaigns recognize that it's the soundbite, the simple sound bites that may break through how this is cut up and pieced together and how it gets out to those limited number of undecided voters. To the Harris campaign, a lot of them are younger, particularly younger men, a racially diverse group. It's why they've been advertising on college football games and why they're looking at sports betting sites, among others, to sort of target their messaging in the couple days and weeks ahead.
All right, Peter, thank you. We're going to talk to Senator Mark Kelly in just a moment, but let me turn to the table here. Let's lift the veil off the expectation setting that goes on with the campaigns, because it just makes me laugh. You know, we just had Jason Miller who's like, oh, Tim Walz is such a great debater. And then all of these Democrats are out in the press saying, Tim Walz is scared. He's not sure. J.D. Vance is this amazing debater. So it's like this reverse complimenting thing so that when whatever happens, they can be like, well, we set those expectations and exceeded them.
By the way, a time-honored tradition for debate prep in decades past, right? I mean, this is what we always see. I actually spoke with the person who played Governor Walz in the prep for Senator J.D. Vance, Congressman Tom Emmer, and he did much of the same thing. This is strategic on the part of the campaigns. Why? Partly to, like, let the audience know that this is kind of what they can expect. Here's the reality. This is not their first rodeo. It is on a stage like this, but both of these candidates have done debates in the past. They've done debates for their races for Congress, for governor, for senator.
They've practiced. They're smart. They're capable. They're pros.
Exactly.
They're pros. And look, if you talk to allies of both of these campaigns, they say, here's the challenge for each of them. For Governor Walz, one ally said a good night for him is if he can keep all of those comments that J.D. Vance once made about Donald Trump, all of the criticism of him in the spotlight. That's what allies want to see from him. In terms of J.D. Vance, and you were just talking to Jason Miller about this, Savannah and Lester, the comments like the cat lady comments, they want him to stay away from controversial comments. Yes, throw a counterpunch, get into the mix, but they do not want him to reiterate some of those controversies that have been front and center that they feel take away from top issues like the economy, like immigration.
All right, for more on what to expect from the Harris-Walz campaign, let's bring in Arizona Senator Mark Kelly. He's appearing with us tonight as a campaign surrogate. Senator, thank you so much for being with us. Where you hear some of the talk about the expectation game. What is the expectation tonight?
Well, I think it's about contrast. You know, in the case of Governor Walz and Kamala Harris, you've got two people that want to lead this country into the future, that have a vision, that want to bring down costs for health care and prescription drugs and child care and so many other things that affect American families. And on the other hand, you have Donald Trump and his Project 2025 that's going to increase costs, $4,000 out-of-pocket costs for American families. And if you're a senior who has benefited from the prescription drug benefit that we put into place with Kamala Harris and the administration, that would go away. So I would expect that we will see the contrast between what each side is offering.
Will Walz go after former President Trump's record or J.D. Vance's record?
Well, I think what you got to understand about J.D. is he's a Yale-trained, mouthpiece for Donald Trump. Donald Trump is, what matters here. He's a convicted felon. Kamala Harris is an experienced prosecutor, an attorney general, senator, and a vice president who really cares about the American people and cares about families. What I've seen from Donald Trump is, he puts people into two categories. You're either the con man or you're the person being conned, and he offers very little for middle class, working class families and everyday Americans.
Senator, you're from the great state of Arizona, of course, my home state. If you can tell, I'm biased toward it. Arizona, of course, was decisive.
Tucson.
Yes, Tucson, Arizona. It was decisive 4 years ago, and yet Kamala Harris seems to be losing ground there. Tim Walz has a rather progressive record on immigration. He's in Minnesota, gave undocumented migrants driver's license, made them eligible for free college tuition, as well as state health insurance. How's that going to play in Arizona?
Well, Savannah, Tim Walz, when he was a member of Congress, was ranked the 7th most bipartisan House member. He served with Gabby. They were freshmen together. I've known the governor, well, and during his service. He's got the experience for this job. And Kamala Harris is ready to go here on day one. And, she wants to take this country into the future where Donald Trump just wants to drag us back into the past and offer more tax tax cuts for billionaires, shred our alliances, and take away health care rights from women. That's what people should remember about the first Trump presidency.
But is immigration a vulnerability in Arizona? I guess just to put a fine point on it, are some of these immigration stances a problem in the state of Arizona, which was decisive last time around?
I was at the border with the vice president on Friday, and we met with sheriff and some mayors, county supervisors, the Border Patrol, and Customs and Border Protection, and talked about these issues. You got to remember, Kamala Harris was a prosecutor and attorney general and senator of a border state. She understands the border very well. And what Donald Trump did on the border, I mean, the last thing he did that had a huge impact is he told Republican senators that they could not vote for the bipartisan border security deal that we negotiated with the White House and with Senate Republicans. And what that did is, I mean, what it would have done if we could pass it, and we were about to pass it, was going to increase Border Patrol pay. We're going to hire more Border Patrol agents, more infrastructure, more fentanyl detection machines. Donald Trump stopped that. Kamala Harris has said that on day one, if we can send her that legislation, and I think we can after Donald Trump loses this election, if we send her that legislation, she'll sign it into law. She's the one who really cares about solving this problem, and will work to try to solve it. Donald Trump just wants to talk about it, Savannah. And, you know, he often just goes down there to get a picture. I had a very effective visit with her on Friday. It went very well. She's ready to deal with this issue.
Senator Mark Kelly, we've got to leave it there. We've got lots to get to. Thank you for your time.
We'll take a break. Coming up, we're counting down to the first and only vice presidential debate where the two VP candidates will introduce themselves to the country in many ways. We'll have a closer look at who they are and what they bring to the table right after this. Welcome back to our special coverage of the first and only vice presidential debate this election cycle between former President Trump's running mate, Ohio Senator J.D. Vance, and Vice President Harris's running mate, Minnesota Governor Tim Walz.
We're going to show you the debate live once it starts in a few moments. But first, a closer look at the candidates. So let's go back to Peter Alexander, with more on who Tim Walz is and how he could help Vice President Harris. Hi, Peter.
Savannah, good morning, or good evening, right? It's what time of day is at this point.
Old habits,
it's
yeah.
The first time that Vance and Walz will have debated in 2 years since they ran for the current positions. Neither of them has faced a moment like this, of course, with millions expected to be watching. Walz has spoken publicly about his desire, though, to debate Vance since Kamala Harris first announced him as his running mate. As a plain-spoken Midwesterner, Tim Walz is known for not pulling any punches.
This is not about the Second Amendment. This is about the safety of our children and our communities.
A self-described white dude for Kamala Harris, the Democratic governor is running alongside the nation's first woman of color atop a major party's ticket. Walz grew up in small-town Nebraska, joining the National Guard as a teenager, using the GI Bill to pay tuition. He'd serve in the Guard for more than 2 decades, becoming a school teacher and high school football coach. He volunteered for John Kerry's presidential campaign in 2004. In 2006, launching his own long-shot bid for Congress, in an upset ousting a 6-term Republican incumbent. Walz served in Washington for the next 12 years, establishing himself as a moderate Democrat. Then in 2018, he ran for governor, winning in a landslide, though some of his progressive policies would draw Republican criticism that he's tried to dismiss.
What a monster. Kids are eating and having full bellies so they can go learn.
2020 would bring defining moments. The COVID pandemic, and the killing of George Floyd that triggered riots and sharp attacks from Republicans for why it took Walz 3 days to call up the National Guard.
Is what it is, and I simply believe that we try to do the best we can.
Walz's critics also point to a state audit report that found major failures by Minnesota's education department during the pandemic, allowing rampant misuse of a federal program meant to feed children.
We can always do better. I think, again, context matters. It was a challenging time for everybody.
Selected by Harris in part for his chemistry with her and his working class roots, Walz regularly touts his connections to the labor community.
I had an opponent who thought this was a real zinger when we were going at it. He said, Governor Walz is in the pocket of organized labor. And I said, that is a damn lie. I am the pocket.
Walz has grown into his role as an attack dog, not shy about going after former President Trump or his running mate, Senator J.D. Vance.
You guys are just weird. And it's, you know, they're running for He-Man Women Haters Club or something.
At this summer's Democratic convention, Walz's 17-year-old son Gus, sitting alongside his mother Gwen and sister Hope, went viral for this emotional moment, reacting to his father's acceptance speech.
But it was just such a visceral, emotional moment that I'm grateful I got to experience it, and I'm so proud of him.
But for his part, Walz has had to defend some of his public comments.
Those weapons of war that I carried in war is the only place where those weapons are at.
Facing accusations, he inflated his military record and retired from the Army National Guard to avoid service in Iraq. Walz says he's proud of his service. Now, the 60-year-old governor from the middle of America is set to make the case why he and Harris should serve in the White House for the next 4 years.
In my reporting ahead of tonight, I'll tell you one of the most interesting things that I learned from those people close to Tim Walz. They say one of their concerns privately is that he can have a tendency to be a bit heated and defensive tonight. So, Savannah and Lester, it's going to be interesting to watch this conversation between the two men. No audience in the room. They've been preparing Walz in case Vance tries to get under his skin. How does he handle it this evening on that stage?
We'll be watching for it, Peter. Thank you. Let's bring back Garrett Hake now for more on who J.D. Vance is and what he brings to the Trump campaign. Garrett?
Lester, J.D. Vance has already introduced himself to the country once as the author of a best-selling memoir, but now this self-described hillbilly has to reintroduce himself to the country again as someone who can make the case that he's ready to be a heartbeat away from the presidency. He is the junior senator from Ohio with only 2 years in government. But J.D. Vance is one of former President Trump's biggest defenders.
I want to help Donald Trump get elected because it's really important that he become the next president.
In the Senate,
how can we defend Ukraine's borders when we're not even defending our own American border?
And on the campaign trail,
The question is, are we going to send America First fighters to Washington, D.C.?
he's one of the leading voices of Trump's MAGA America First movement, not holding back in pushing the former president's agenda.
Republicans, we need to govern like we won the majority the American people gave us, not like a bunch of cowards. Let's get to work in Washington, D.C. No more talk. It's time for action.
But that hasn't always been the case. This was Vance in 2016.
I'm a never Trump guy. I never liked him.
He was deeply critical of Trump then, going so far as to liken him to America's Hitler. But this was Vance just 6 years later.
The president is right. I wasn't always nice, but the simple fact is he's the best president of my lifetime, and he revealed the corruption in this country like nobody else.
Running for Senate in 2022 in Ohio as a pro-Trump candidate.
I was wrong about Donald Trump. I didn't think he was going to be a good president, Brett. He was a great president.
Vance, shot to fame, is the author of Hillbilly Elegy, a memoir about his upbringing in a poor, hard-hit part of Ohio. He then enlisted in the Marines, attended Yale Law School, worked in venture capital, and then on to the Senate, his first role in government. On the major issues, Vance has said in the past he would support a national ban on abortion after 15 weeks, but supports exceptions, including for rape and the life of the mother. On immigration, Vance has called for finishing Trump's southern border wall. He has come under criticism for a 2021 interview with Tucker Carlson, where he said the U.S. is being run by
a bunch of childless cat ladies who are miserable at their own lives and the choices that they've made, and so they want to make the rest of the country miserable too.
And on the issue of the 2020 presidential election, then Senate candidate Vance suggested he would have supported fraudulent slates of pro-Trump electors.
If I had been vice president, I would have told the states like Pennsylvania, Georgia, and so many others that we needed to have multiple slates of electors, and I think the U.S. Congress should have fought over it from there.
In recent weeks, Vance's false claims about Haitian immigrants eating pets in Springfield, Ohio, set off a firestorm, which he later suggested was by design.
If I have to, create stories so that the American media actually pays attention to the suffering of the American people, then that's what I'm going to do.
Now, the father of two, just 40 years old, after not even a full 2 years in government, is set to step onto the debate stage to make the case why he and Donald Trump should be the next leaders of the United States.
Let's have some fun now.
One other important thing to know about J.D. Vance is the close friendship he's developed with Donald Trump Jr., who was instrumental in Vance getting picked for this ticket. The two of them see themselves as shaping the future of a Republican Party even after Donald Trump Sr. is off the stage. Guys.
All right. Thank you very much, Garrett. We want to turn now to President Biden's former White House press secretary, Jen Psaki, and Donald Trump's former deputy White House secretary, Hogan Gidley. Good afternoon, good evening to all of you. It's this close to a good morning. Peter started it. Hogan, let's talk about, we're talking about J.D. Vance, some of these likability issues. Is this something you think he should take on tonight, whether it's the childless cat lady or some of these other kinds of comments?
I think it'll solve itself just naturally. I think it gives him a chance to introduce himself to the American people. You heard one of Trump's surrogates earlier talk about his tough upbringing, where he had a mom who was an addict. She wasn't around. He was raised by his grandmother, obviously going into the military, putting himself, getting to college, rather, with scholarship money, that type of thing. Kind of shows you his ability to relate to people out there who are facing struggles in their daily lives. What's interesting, though, is in this particular debate, J.D. Vance has an opportunity here to really kind of expose, I think, Governor Walz, because he hasn't really answered any questions. He had one debate where he was like an emotional support animal for Kamala, and he had one question about his lying about his military service, and he said, I don't really speak English well, so that's part of the problem. But he was a governor. And so he has a record. He's going to have to answer why he wants taxpayer dollars to pay for illegal aliens to get free health care and free college tuition, why he locked down his state and then had National Guard troops fire paintballs at citizens on their front porch. Those are serious issues he's never had to answer for. And I think JD's going to bring that up.
Because as Jason Miller, the Trump campaign staffer, said, there's an article that says they bubble wrapped Tim Walz. And look, I mean, Axios, an independent news organization, did an analysis and found that Vance alone has done more than 7 times as many interviews as Harris and Walz.
True, and also when Vance does this, he often attacks the press. But putting that aside, Tim Walz,
he's there.
No, I agree with you. Tim Walz propelled himself onto this ticket because he was so appealing on television and because he was so relatable and likable. He should be out there more. And I think it's crazy that he's not out there more. And it is true that it also means that it puts more pressure on this night. He's going to have to answer tough questions. So will J.D. Vance.
Sure.
I do think immigration, you were talking about this earlier with the senator from Arizona, is a hard one for the Harris-Walz team, because it is the issue where they are most underwater with voters. That's why Harris went to the border, and there is some work to be done on that.
Let me ask both of you, nothing seems to move this race. We're still looking at roughly 50-50. So might the goal for both tonight to be do no harm at this point?
I think the first rule of a vice presidential pick is to do no harm, and that's not just for the pick itself, but in a debate, for example. As we were talking about, though, I think a lot of these camps are already entrenched. A lot of folks are going to vote for Trump no matter what. A lot of folks are going to vote for Kamala no matter what. I think there could be an outside force that really tips the scales here. We just had a hurricane. People are suffering in a state like North Carolina and Georgia, both swing states. A lot of people are suffering, don't get me wrong, but those states matter in this upcoming election. There's now a war, full scale, between Israel and Iran. That's an issue I think the American people care about. And a strike that's going to impact a lot of American people, too.
But those issues, they don't move the voters on their own. It's how does the ticket deal with those issues. So I think if you're Walz tonight, you have all these backdrop of these challenging issues you just mentioned. It's reminding people about leadership and why stability and sanity in the Situation Room and in the Oval Office actually matters.
And that does.
Remember, Trump's national security team, many of them don't even want him to be the commander-in-chief.
And
so that's a challenge for, I think,
Of course it is. But as president, we didn't have wars breaking out all over the world. We didn't have illegal immigrants coming into our American communities, raping and killing people. And those types of things absolutely should be a reminder to the American people that leadership does matter, and we didn't have these problems when Donald Trump was in the White House.
You can take this debate to NBC News now and continue to the green room. Real quick, show of hands, who thinks there will be another debate between Trump and Harris? Wow.
No.
Who thinks there should be? We'll leave it on this point of agreement.
How about that?
Hogan, Jen, thank you very much. We're going to take a break right here, and still ahead tonight, how the vice presidential debate could shake up the polls with Election Day just 35 days away. Our man Steve Kornacki over at the big board to break it all down. Coming up next. Welcome back to our special coverage of the first and only vice presidential debate before Election Day.
Tonight's debate is potentially the last debate voters will see before the general election. It could change voters' minds in the key battleground states.
So we've got Steve Kornacki over at his post to break down where the race stands right now. Hi, Steve.
Hi, Savannah and Lester. Take a look here. The national poll average first. All the major national polls, we keep a running average. And right now, Kamala Harris at 49%, Trump at 46%, a 3-point lead in the poll average nationally for Kamala Harris right now. Raises the question, this is the third straight election that Donald Trump has been the Republican nominee. How did the race look at this exact same point the last two times? Well, take a look here. 4 years ago, on this date, in the poll average, Joe Biden had a large lead, 9 points over Donald Trump. And, of course, Biden did go on to unseat Donald Trump. But 8 years ago, at this same point, Hillary Clinton had a lead of, does that 3 look familiar? The exact same 3-point lead that Kamala Harris has in the poll average now. And, of course, Hillary Clinton did win the popular vote in 2016, but she lost to Trump where it matters in the Electoral College, in those key swing states. So what do the swing states look like right now? We've been talking about this core group of 7 battlegrounds. And, again, what you're seeing here is our current average of all the polls in those states. And the headline here, obviously, is extremely close. Look, the widest margin you're going to see here is 3 points for Harris in Michigan and in Nevada. Look at North Carolina. You see Harris there leading. I say leading. It's 1/10 of 1 point in the average right now. One thing to keep in mind, we saw big polling misses in the Midwest states in 2016 and 2020. Both elections, they underestimated. The polls did Trump's actual support. Keep that in mind. Michigan, Pennsylvania, Wisconsin, as we see numbers there this fall. Has that problem been solved? Does it persist? And just for the sake of showing you the state of play right now, this is not a prediction, but if it were to break exactly like this on Election Day, these states were to go exactly as they look right now, let me show you what it would do to the electoral map. So you see we have the battlegrounds in gray. If we fill them in based on the current polling average, this is what you would get. That would give Harris 292. That would be enough for the presidency. But remember, we just showed you North Carolina 1/10 of 1 point. Just by getting that, if Trump could get that, he'd be at 262. He'd be one Midwest state away from the presidency. So that's how close it is when you start to look at those battleground averages right now. Now, in terms of tonight, possible implications for the vote in November in this vice presidential debate, let's take a look at the image of each one of these candidates coming to the stage tonight. Favorable, unfavorable. This is our most recent poll. Tim Walz, 40% positive, 33 negative. He is 7 points above water. J.D. Vance, on the other hand, 32 favorable, 45 unfavorable, 13 points underwater. And perspective on that, if you went back 10 presidential elections, takes us all the way back to 1988, only one major party vice presidential nominee has been further underwater than J.D. Vance is right now. That was Dan Quayle in 1992 when he was running for re-election with Bush Sr. And, of course, that ticket did go on to lose.
All right, Steve, thank you so much.
Kate Snow is talking to a group of voters in the city of Pittsburgh in the critical Commonwealth of Pennsylvania. Kate?
Yeah, it is critical, isn't it? Thank you, Lester. I've got 6 voters here with me. All of you described yourselves as somewhat moderate, somewhat in the center, some more than others. I want to start with Rona and Merrill. We've had a lot of news today about Israel and about the attack by Iran. Both of you said you are motivated. You're Jewish, you're Democrats, both of you registered Democrats, but you're seeing this very differently. Rona, tell me why you're thinking about possibly voting for Donald Trump.
Well, today is not a good day to ask me that, I guess, because today, I mean, I'm really thankful, right? Largest barrage of ballistic missiles ever shot at a country in history, and the U.S. supported Israel and shot down missiles along with Jordan and Israel, and so I'm so incredibly thankful for that, and a big Biden fan today.
Are you still thinking you might vote Republican?
I am still undecided, yes, absolutely, because I think every day right now is so utterly critical, and watching how this continues to unfold.
And what about you, Merrill?
And for me, today just verified what I've already felt, that the Biden-Harris administration has been very pro-Israel. Today was really an existential threat for the state of Israel once again. And the United States and the Biden administration, along with Vice President Harris, really stepped up.
So you're definitely voting Harris going into tonight's debate.
Yes.
Let me turn to Claire and Brian. Both of you voted for Trump in 2016, then went away from Trump in 2020, and now you're both considering former President Trump again. Even though I think you said you don't really like J.D. Vance very much.
I really don't like either of them very much. I'm looking at something different. I want something different. I'm not really sure where we're going to end up.
So maybe tonight you hear something that pushes you?
Maybe if tonight I hear something,
Yeah.
you know, it might make up my mind. You know, I'm still kind of up in the air, but.
Claire, you said to me that you're a little worried if you vote for Trump, you wouldn't be able to, you'd have to lie to your friends.
I mean, I think it's hard to vote for anyone. You know, the keyboard killers, no matter which way. I mean, you vote, you know, in this town democratically, and someone's like, well, you voted for this mayor, and then you see something federally, and they say, well, you voted for that president, no matter which side you're on.
Brandon, you said that your community, which I think is a predominantly black community, is more divided right now, more at odds than you've seen it in an election.
Yeah, so it just seems like there is no real middle ground. Everything is radicalized. Everything is extreme, kind of like what she was saying. Yeah. But more so from my community, being young and African American, it seems like a lot of people are coming to the topic of politics late, and they're missing nuance. So what they're hearing right now is stirring a lot of passion that's bringing them one way or another.
And John, real quick, one word. What do you need to hear tonight?
I guess it's just seeing that Walz is going to support Kamala Harris. I'm pretty much decided that
on Harris.
J.D. Vance and Trump are a danger to our democracy.
Thank you all so much. I'll send it back to you guys, Lester.
All right, Kate, thanks very much. We'll take a break. Next, we're just minutes away from tonight's vice presidential debate. We'll show it to you live after this. Welcome back to our special coverage of tonight's vice presidential debate.
We're about 7 minutes away now. Ohio Senator J.D. Vance facing off against Minnesota Governor Tim Walz. Might be the last debate voters see at all before Election Day.
Let's go back to Tom Yamas in the spin room. It's going to be crowded there tonight, if not already.
Oh, yeah, you guys, you know that is true. You know, these spin rooms are where the candidates come with their surrogates right after the debate to argue they won the debate. I want to show you a live camera right now of this spin room because it's unlike any we've seen before because of its size. It's only about 3,000 to 4,000 square feet. It's going to be filled with reporters and surrogates. There's going to be a crush of people here after the debate, including at least one of the candidates who is debating tonight. So this could be chaotic. It could be exciting. It could be fun. It could be wild. We'll have no idea until after the debate. I will tell you this much. It reminds me of my younger days when you go to house parties here in Manhattan inside studio apartments and there was way more people than there was room. Nonetheless, it'll be memorable, and we're going to look for all that excitement right after the debate.
Well, we've learned a lot about you, Tom.
I want to hear the rest of the story.
I have to say, I don't know if he was describing a spin room or a rave.
Surely there was more to that story.
All right, let's go to senior White House correspondent Kelly O'Donnell. We're going to get to the bottom of that one. Also in the spoon room, been talking to Tim Walz's staff. So, Kelly, what's the vibe?
Well, I've just heard from those with Governor Walz. They say Vice President Harris put in a phone call to him to wish him good luck. You'd heard about some nerves before all of this. Now they're saying he's energized and he's ready. Among the top goals for Governor Walz today is to be able to talk about Kamala Harris and what she could bring to the country and to try to tie J.D. Vance to the Project 2025 agenda that former President Trump tries to distance himself from as much as possible. They also, in their prep, expect that Vance will try to get under the skin of Governor Walz, and he's going to try to focus on reaching voters who have not yet made up their minds. And they also expect that Governor Walz will have to answer for some of the things that have been a frequent target of J.D. Vance, like questions about his military record, and a time when Governor Walz said that he had been in combat when he was in a foreign country working on behalf of the Afghanistan operation, but not in Afghanistan. So they expect that he'll have to answer for that, and what they have prepared is in some ways to talk about his 24 years in the National Guard and saying that is longer than anything that J.D. Vance has done in his professional life, and that they think that is not an argument that Vance can win. So tone-wise, you're going to see Governor Walz trying to be that affable coach, teacher, dad, and to try to relate to those in the middle of the country who also enjoy plaid, as I know you have noted, Savannah.
All right, Kelly, thank you.
Let's bring back Garrett Hake in the spin room. He's covering the Trump-Vance campaign. What are your thoughts here as we head down to the final minutes?
At the end of the day, Lester, this is still all about the people at the top of the ticket. That's something that wasn't lost today in Trump world. Donald Trump did something unusual today. He held not one but two campaign events of his own on the day of his VP debate, both of them in Wisconsin, mentioning J.D. Vance just one time during those two events in response to a question. So for Donald Trump, this is still about Trump versus Harris, and I think that'll be something that's forefront on the mind of J.D. Vance when he takes the stage tonight as well.
All
Lester?
right. Thank you, Garrett. Let's bring back Kristen Welker, Hallie Jackson, and Peter Alexander has joined the conversation. Peter, I mean, based on everything we've talked about in the last hour, it seems like, in a way, Tim Walz, the work for him is on substance. What does he stand for? Defending past positions as governor of Minnesota. And for J.D. Vance, it's about style. It's about likability, about some of the controversial things he said. That seems like where the work is.
Yeah, I think you guys are right. We've made a lot of these points to this point. One other point that I would just add to this conversation is, remember how this whole campaign started where age was the big issue? Joe Biden was going to be 86 at the end of a second term. Right now, Donald Trump is 78 years old. His age means there's a little bit unique attention being focused on J.D. Vance right now. He's 40. You're going to see Tim Walz, who is 60 years old today. The last time there was a big age discrepancy like this, 1988, Lloyd Benson and Dan Quayle, who was 41, a year older, of course, then J.D. Vance is when he's up there on stage.
And Vance has been senator for 2 years.
And the gist is that was one of the rare moments where a line broke through. You know, I knew John F. Kennedy, you know John F. Kennedy. These moments rarely break through. Is there a viral moment like that that sort of defines this night, or is it a wash ultimately with the last month to go?
Kristen, at the end of the day, and I asked this question with 3 minutes to go, do these debates matter? Does a vice presidential debate matter in the big picture?
They can matter. Think about back in 2012 when Joe Biden had a very strong debate performance against Paul Ryan and really helped to reset the campaign after former President Obama stumbled in his first debate against Mitt Romney. So yes, they can matter. Again, I think this takes on outsized meaning because of the fact that there's no second presidential debate. One more point, in listening to those voters that Kate was talking to, all of them seem so frustrated with the process. And you think about that word change. Right now, Vice President Kamala Harris wins on the change argument by 9 points. I think that's part of the work that J.D. Vance is going to try to do.
Well, change is interesting because she's an incumbent, but so is former President Trump.
That's right.
So it's interesting to see that. I mean, people say, they like to say, conventional wisdom, these vice presidential debates don't matter. And maybe they didn't when elections weren't decided by 10,000 voters
That's exactly
in a Midwest
right.
state.
In two different states, and that's it.
Yeah.
I come back to something that you have said from the jump, Savannah, through this election cycle, which is let's have a little bit of humility here, right? It's hard for us to predict, especially with the race this close, especially with the dynamic of no next debate for the presidential candidates. Remember what this race is going to come down to. Those 6 critical battlegrounds, the economy and immigration. We have seen that consistently in the polling. Expect to hear both of those issues hammered big time on stage tonight.
And worth noting also, this is the first presidential election since Roe was overturned. I think that's going to be an X factor, too.
Mics will be on tonight. Is that going to make a huge difference in terms of expectations based on what we saw in the presidential debate?
Remember, it was the Harris campaign that in the presidential debate wanted the mics to be on throughout here. This time, they are on throughout. CBS can turn them off as necessary, but it's that back and forth. They're hoping that you can hear those snide comments, perhaps by either side.
Show of hands, who thinks there will be another debate between Trump and Harris?
Listen to you at this show of hands.
Show of hands. It's a quick poll. Okay. Who thinks there should be?
We're journalists. We think there should be.
Okay. All right. There we go.
Good answer. Well, it is the top of the hour now, 9 p.m. here in New York City. We are just seconds away from tonight's only vice presidential debate between Ohio Republican Senator J.D. Vance and Minnesota Democratic Governor Tim Walz.
That's right. It is also potentially, if you haven't noticed, possibly the last debate we will see before Election Day. Election Day now just 35 days away, 5 weeks.
We've kind of set the table here on what people will be looking at and what we'll all be talking about in a little while. We will have in-depth analysis once the debate concludes here on NBC. But tonight's event is hosted by CBS News in their studio in New York, just a few blocks from here.
Yeah, and as the last debate was between the running mates, Donald Trump and Kamala Harris, there's no audience in there tonight. So each candidate is going to have 2 minutes for their answers, and then there's a rebuttal. And the moderators have said, Lester, there will be some fact-checking, but they're really counting on the candidates to fact-check each other.
And as we noted, unlike the last debate, microphones will not be muted, but the network says they reserve the right to mute the candidates. So that'll be an interesting process as they go along.
Okay, the vice presidential debate about to be on. Let's go to CBS Network Studios, West 57th, here in the heart of Manhattan, and watch this debate.
Presidential debate.
Good evening. I'm Nora O'Donnell, and thank you for joining us for tonight's CBS News Vice Presidential Debate. We want to welcome our viewers on CBS, on other networks here in the U.S. and around the world. We have a consequential night ahead, and our focus is the issues that matter to you, the voter. Let's introduce the candidates. Minnesota's Democratic Governor Tim Walz and Ohio's Republican Senator J.D. Vance tonight meeting for the first time.
I'm Margaret Brennan. In order to have a thoughtful and civil debate, these are the rules that both campaigns have agreed to. Questions will be directed at one candidate, who will have 2 minutes to respond. The other candidate will be allowed 2 minutes for rebuttal. Then each candidate will get another minute to make further points, with an additional 1 minute each at the discretion of the moderator. The primary role of the moderators is to facilitate the debate between the candidates, enforce the rules, and provide the candidates with the opportunity to fact-check claims made by each other.
CBS News reserves the right to mute the candidates' microphones to maintain decorum. We have not shared the questions or topics with the campaigns. The stage is set. Governor, Senator, thank you for joining us. Let's get started. Tonight, our country is facing several unfolding crises. The Middle East is on the brink of war. Americans are suffering from the catastrophic impact of Hurricane Helene. And now a labor strike as 25,000 dock workers from Maine to Texas are picketing. We're going to begin tonight with the Middle East. Margaret.
Thank you, Nora. Earlier today, Iran launched its largest attack yet on Israel, but that attack failed, thanks to joint U.S. and Israeli defensive action. President Biden has deployed more than 40,000 U.S. military personnel and assets to that region over the past year to try to prevent a regional war. Iran is weakened, but the U.S. still considers it the largest state sponsor of terrorism in the world, and it has drastically reduced the time it would take to develop a nuclear weapon. It is down now to 1 or 2 weeks' time. Governor Walz, if you were the final voice in the Situation Room, would you support or oppose a preemptive strike by Israel on Iran? You have 2 minutes.
Well, thank you, and thank you for those joining at home tonight. Let's keep in mind where this started. October 7th, Hamas terrorists massacred over 1,400 Israelis and took prisoners. Israel's ability to be able to defend itself is absolutely fundamental. Getting its hostages back, fundamental, and ending the humanitarian crisis in Gaza. But the expansion of Israel and its proxies is an absolute fundamental necessity for the United States to have the steady leadership there. You saw it experienced today, where along with our Israeli partners and our coalition, able to stop the incoming attack. But what's fundamental here is that steady leadership is going to matter. It's clear, and the world saw it on that debate stage a few weeks ago, a nearly 80-year-old Donald Trump talking about crowd sizes is not what we need in this moment. But it's not just that. It's those that were closest to Donald Trump that understand how dangerous he is when the world is this dangerous. His chief of staff, John Kelly, said that he was the most flawed human being he'd ever met. And both of his secretaries of defense and his national security advisors said he should be nowhere near the White House. Now, the person closest to them, Donald Trump, said he's unfit for the highest office. That was Senator Vance. What we've seen out of Vice President Harris is we've seen steady leadership. We've seen a calmness that is able to draw on the coalitions to bring them together. Understanding that our allies matter. When our allies see Donald Trump turn towards Vladimir Putin, turn towards North Korea, when we start to see that type of fickleness around holding the coalitions together, we will stay committed. And as the Vice President said today we will protect our forces and our allied forces, and there will be consequences.
Governor, your time is up. Senator Vance, the same question. Would you support or oppose a preemptive strike by Israel on Iran? You have 2 minutes.
So, Margaret, I want to answer the question. First of all, thanks, Governor. Thanks to CBS for hosting the debate. And thanks, most importantly, to the American people who are watching this evening and caring enough about this country to pay attention to this vice presidential debate. I want to answer the question, but I want to actually give an introduction to myself a little bit because I recognize a lot of Americans don't know who either one of us are. I was raised in a working-class family. My mother required food assistance for periods of her life. My grandmother required Social Security help to raise me, and she raised me in part because my own mother struggled with addiction for a big chunk of my early life. I went to college on the GI Bill after I enlisted in the Marine Corps and served in Iraq. And so I stand here asking to be your vice president with extraordinary gratitude for this country, for the American dream that made it possible for me to live my dreams. And most importantly, I know that a lot of you are worried about the chaos in the world and the feeling that the American dream is unattainable. I want to try to convince you tonight over the next 90 minutes that if we get better leadership in the White House, if we get Donald Trump back in the White House, the American dream is going to be attainable once again. Now, to answer this particular question, we have to remember that as much as Governor Walz just accused Donald Trump of being an agent of chaos, Donald Trump actually delivered stability in the world, and he did it by establishing effective deterrence. People were afraid of stepping out of line. Iran, which launched this attack, has received over $100 billion in unfrozen assets thanks to the Kamala Harris administration. What do they use that money for? They use it to buy weapons that they're now launching against our allies, and God forbid, potentially launching against the United States as well. Donald Trump recognized that for people to fear the United States, you needed peace through strength. They needed to recognize that if they got out of line, the United States global leadership would put stability and peace back in the world. Now, you asked about a preemptive strike, Margaret, and I want to answer the question. Look, it is up to Israel what they think they need to do to keep their country safe, and we should support our allies wherever they are when they're fighting the bad guys. I think that's the right approach to take with the Israel question.
Thank you, Senator. Governor Walz, do you care to respond to any of the allegations?
Well, look, Donald Trump was in office. We'll sometimes hear a revisionist history, but when Donald Trump was in office, it was Donald Trump who we had a coalition of nations that had boxed Iran's nuclear program in, the inability to advance it. Donald Trump pulled that program and put nothing else in its place. So Iran is closer to a nuclear weapon than they were before because of Donald Trump's fickle leadership. And when Iran shot down an American aircraft in international airspace, Donald Trump tweeted, because that's the standard diplomacy of Donald Trump. And when Iranian missiles did fall near U.S. troops and they received traumatic brain injuries, Donald Trump wrote it off as headaches. Look, our allies understand that Donald Trump is fickle. He will go to whoever has the most flattery or where it makes sense to him. Steady leadership like you witnessed today, like you witnessed in April. Both Iranian attacks were repelled. Our coalition is strong, and we need the steady leadership that Kamala Harris is providing.
Senator Vance, the U.S. did have a diplomatic deal with Iran to temporarily pause parts of its nuclear program, and President Trump did exit that deal. He recently said, just 5 days ago, the U.S. must now make a diplomatic deal with Iran because the consequences are impossible. Did he make a mistake? You have 1 minute.
Well, first of all, Margaret, diplomacy is not a dirty word, but I think that's something that Governor Walz just said is quite extraordinary. You yourself just said Iran is as close to a nuclear weapon today as they have ever been. And Governor Walz, you blame Donald Trump, who has been the vice president for the last 3.5 years, and the answer is your running mate, not mine. Donald Trump consistently made the world more secure. Now, we talk about the sequence of events that led us to where we are right now, and you can't ignore October the 7th, which I appreciate Governor Walz bringing up. But when did Iran and Hamas and their proxies attack Israel? It was during the administration of Kamala Harris. So Governor Walz can criticize Donald Trump's tweets, but effective, smart diplomacy and peace through strength is how you bring stability back to a very broken world. Donald Trump has already done it once before. Ask yourself at home, when was the last time, I'm 40 years old, when was the last time that an American president didn't have a major conflict break out? The only answer is during the 4 years that Donald Trump was president.
Gentlemen, we have a lot to get to. Nora?
Margaret, thank you. Let's turn now to Hurricane Helene. The storm could become one of the deadliest on record. More than 160 people are dead and hundreds more are missing. Scientists say climate change makes these hurricanes larger, stronger, and more deadly because of the historic rainfall. Senator Vance, according to CBS News polling, 7 in 10 Americans and more than 60% of Republicans under the age of 45 favor the U.S. taking steps to try and reduce climate change. Senator, what responsibility would the Trump administration have to try and reduce the impact of climate change? I'll give you 2 minutes.
Sure. So first of all, let's start with the hurricane, because it's an unbelievable, unspeakable human tragedy. I just saw today actually a photograph of 2 grandparents on a roof with a 6-year-old child, and it was the last photograph ever taken of them because the roof collapsed and those innocent people lost their lives. And I'm sure Governor Walz joins me in saying our hearts go out to those innocent people, our prayers go out to them, and we want as robust and aggressive as a federal response as we can get to save as many lives as possible, and then of course afterwards to help the people in those communities rebuild. I mean, these are communities that I love. Some of them I know very personally in Appalachia, all across the Southeast. They need their government to do their job, and I commit that when Donald Trump is president again, the government will put the citizens of this country first when they suffer from a disaster. Now, Nora, you asked about climate change. I think this is a very important issue. Look, a lot of people are justifiably worried about all these crazy weather patterns. I think it's important for us, first of all, to say Donald Trump and I support clean air, clean water. We want the environment to be cleaner and safer. But one of the things that I've noticed some of our Democratic friends talking a lot about is a concern about carbon emissions, this idea that carbon emissions drives all of the climate change. Well, let's just say that's true, just for the sake of argument, so we're not arguing about weird science. Let's just say that's true. Well, if you believe that, what would you want to do? The answer is that you'd want to reshore as much American manufacturing as possible, and you'd want to produce as much energy as possible in the United States of America, because we're the cleanest economy in the entire world. What have Kamala Harris's policies actually led to? More energy production in China, more manufacturing overseas, more doing business in some of the dirtiest parts of the entire world. And when I say that, I mean the amount of carbon emissions they're doing per unit of economic output. So if we actually care about getting cleaner air and cleaner water, the best thing to do is to double down and invest in American workers and the American people. And unfortunately, Kamala Harris has done exactly the opposite.
Governor Walz, you have 2 minutes to respond.
Well, we got close to an agreement because all those things are happening. Look, first of all, it is a horrific tragedy with this hurricane, and my heart goes out to the folks that are down there in contact with the governors. I serve as co-chair of the Council of Governors as we work together on these emergency managements. Governors know no partisanship. They work together. So all of the governors and the emergency responders are on the ground. Those happen on the front end. The federal government comes in, makes sure they're there to that we recover, but we're still in that phase where we need to make sure that they're staying there, staying focused. Now, look, coming back to the climate change issue, there's no doubt this thing roared onto the scene faster and stronger than anything we've seen. Senator Vance has said that there's a climate problem in the past. Donald Trump called it a hoax and then joked that these things would make more beachfront property to be able to invest in. What we've seen out of the Harris administration now, the Biden-Harris administration, is we've seen this investment. We've seen massive investments, the biggest in global history that we've seen in the Inflation Reduction Act, has created jobs all across the country. 2,000 in Jeffersonville, Ohio, taking the EV technology that we invented and making it here. 200,000 jobs across the country. The largest solar manufacturing plant in North America sits in Minnesota. But my farmers know climate change is real. They've seen 500-year droughts, 500-year floods back to back. But what they're doing is adapting, and this has allowed them to tell me, look, I harvest corn, I harvest soybean, and I harvest wind. We are producing more natural gas and more oil at any time than we ever have. We're also producing more clean energy. So the solution for us is to continue to move forward, that climate change is real. Reducing our impact is absolutely critical, but this is not a false choice. You can do that at the same time you're creating the jobs that we're seeing all across the country. That's exactly what this administration has done. We are seeing us becoming an energy superpower for the future, not just the current. And that's what absolutely makes sense. And then we start thinking about how do we mitigate these disasters.
Thank you. Senator, I want to give you an opportunity to respond there. The governor mentioned that President Trump has called climate change a hoax. Do you agree?
Well, look, what the president has said is that if the Democrats, in particular Kamala Harris and her leadership, if they really believe that climate change is serious, what they would be doing is more manufacturing and more energy production in the United States of America, and that's not what they're doing. So clearly Kamala Harris herself doesn't believe her own rhetoric on this. If she did, she would actually agree with Donald Trump's energy policies. Now, something
something Governor Walz said I think is important to touch upon, because when we talk about clean energy, I think that's a slogan that often the Democrats will use here. And I'm talking, of course, about the Democratic leadership. And the real issue is that if you're spending hundreds of millions or even billions of dollars of American taxpayer money on solar panels that are made in China, number one, you're going to make the economy dirtier. We should be making more of those solar panels here in the United States of America. Some of them are, Tim, but a lot of them are being made overseas in China, especially the components that go into those solar panels. So if you really want to make the environment cleaner, you've got to invest in more energy production. We haven't built a nuclear facility, I think, one in the past 40 years.
Senator.
Natural gas, we got to invest more in it. Kamala Harris has done the opposite. That's raised energy prices and also meant that we're doing
Senator,
worse by
your
the
time
climate.
is up. Governor, would you like to respond?
Well, look, we're producing more natural gas than we ever have. There's no moratorium on that. We're producing more oil. But the folks know, and like I said again, these are not liberal folks. These are not folks that are Green New Deal folks. These are farmers that have been drought one year, massive flooding the next year. They understand that it makes sense. Look, our #1 export cannot be topsoil from erosion from these massive storms. We saw it in Minnesota this summer. And thinking about how do we respond to that, we're thinking ahead on this. And what Kamala Harris has been able to do in Minnesota, we're starting to weatherproof some of these things. The infrastructure law that was passed allows us to think about mitigation in the future. How do we make sure that we're protecting by burying our power lines? How do we make sure that we're protecting lakefronts and things that we're seeing more and more of? But to call it a hoax and to take the oil company executives to Mar-a-Lago, say, give me money for my campaign and I'll let you do whatever you want. We can be smarter about that, and an all-above energy policy is exactly what she's doing, creating those jobs right here.
Governor, your time is up. The overwhelming consensus among scientists is that the Earth's climate is warming at an unprecedented rate. Margaret?
Thank you, Nora. We're going to turn now to immigration. The crisis at the U.S.-Mexico border consistently ranks as one of the top issues for American voters. Senator Vance, your campaign is pledging to carry out the largest mass deportation plan in American history and to use the U.S. military to do so. Could you be more specific about exactly how this will work? For example, would you deport parents who have entered the U.S. illegally and separate them from any of their children who were born on U.S. soil? You have 2 minutes.
So first of all, Margaret, before we talk about deportations, we have to stop the bleeding. We have a historic immigration crisis because Kamala Harris started and said that she wanted to undo all of Donald Trump's border policies. 94 executive orders suspending deportations, decriminalizing illegal aliens, massively increasing the asylum fraud that exists in our system. That has opened the floodgates. And what it's meant is that a lot of fentanyl is coming into our country. I had a mother who struggled with opioid addiction and has gotten clean. I don't want people who are struggling with addiction to be deprived of their second chance because Kamala Harris let in fentanyl into our communities at record levels. So you've got to stop the bleeding. You've got to re-implement Donald Trump's border policies, build the wall, re-implement deportations. And that gets me to your point, Margaret, about what do we actually do? So we've got 25 million illegal aliens who are here in the country. What do we do with them? I think the first thing that we do is we start with the criminal migrants. About 1 million of those people have committed some form of crime in addition to crossing the border illegally. I think you start with deportations on those folks. And then I think you make it harder for illegal aliens to undercut the wages of American workers. A lot of people will go home if they can't work for less than minimum wage in our own country. And by the way, that'll be really good for our workers who just want to earn a fair wage for doing a good day's work. And the final point, Margaret, is you ask about family separation. Right now in this country, Margaret, we have 320,000 children that the Department of Homeland Security has effectively lost. Some of them have been sex trafficked. Some of them hopefully are at homes with their families. Some of them have been used as drug trafficking mules. The real family separation policy in this country is unfortunately Kamala Harris's wide open southern border. And I'd ask my fellow Americans to remember when she came into office, she said she was going to do this. Real leadership would be saying, you know what, I screwed up. We're going to go back to Donald Trump's border policies. I wish that she would do that. It would be good for all of us.
Governor, Do you care to respond to any of those specific allegations, including that the vice president is, quote, letting in fentanyl and using kids as drug mules, among other things, regarding children?
The drug mule is not true, but I will say about this, about the fentanyl, because this is a crisis of this, the opioid crisis. And the good news on this is the last 12 months saw the largest decrease in opioid deaths in our nation's history, 30% decrease in Ohio. But there's still more work to do. But let's go back to this on immigration. Kamala Harris was the Attorney General of the largest state and a border state in California. She's the only person in this race who prosecuted transnational gangs for human trafficking and drug interventions. But look, we all want to solve this. Most of us want to solve this, and that is the United States Congress. That's the Border Patrol agents. That's the Chamber of Commerce. That's most Americans out here. That's why we had the fairest and the toughest bill on immigration that this nation's seen. It was crafted by a conservative senator from Oklahoma, James Lankford. I know him. He's super conservative, but he's a man of principle, wants to get it done. Democrats and Republicans worked on this piece of legislation. The Border Patrol said, this is what we need in here. These are the experts. And the Chamber of Commerce and the Wall Street Journal said, pass this thing. Kamala Harris helped get there. 1,500 new border agents, detection for drugs, DOJ money to speed up the adjudications on this, just what America wants. But as soon as I was getting ready to pass and actually tackle this, Donald Trump said no, told them to vote against it because it gives him a campaign issue. It gives him what would Donald Trump talk about if we actually did some of these things? And they need to be done by the legislature. You can't just do this through the executive branch. So look, we have the options to do this. Donald Trump had 4 years. He had 4 years to do this. And he promised you, America, how easy it would be. I'll build you a big, beautiful wall, and Mexico will pay for it. Less than 2% of that wall got built, and Mexico didn't pay a dime. But here we are again, 9 years after he came down that escalator, dehumanizing people and telling them what he was going to do. As far as the deportation plan, at one point, Senator Vance said it was so unworkable to be laughable. So that's where we're at. Pass the bill, she'll sign it.
Governor, your time is up. Senator, the question was, will you separate parents from their children, even if their kids are U.S. citizens? You have 1 minute.
Margaret, my point is that we already have massive child separations thanks to Kamala Harris's open border. And I didn't accuse Kamala Harris of inviting drug mules. I said that she enabled the Mexican drug cartels to operate freely in this country. And we know that they use children as drug mules, and it is a disgrace, and it has to stop. Look, I think what Tim said just doesn't pass the smell test. For 3 years, Kamala Harris went out bragging that she was going to undo Donald Trump's border policy. She did exactly that. We had a record number of illegal crossings. We had a record number of fentanyl coming into our country. And now that she's running for president, or a few months before, she says that somehow she got religion and cared a lot about a piece of legislation. The only thing that she did when she became the vice president, when she became the appointed border czar, was to undo 94 Donald Trump executive actions that opened the border. This problem is leading to massive problems in the United States of America. Parents who can't afford health care, schools that are overwhelmed. It's got to stop, and it will when Donald Trump is president again.
Senator, your time is up. Governor, what about our CBS News polling, which does show that a majority of Americans, more than 50%, support mass deportations?
Look, we fix this issue with a bill that is necessary, but the issue on this is what happens when you don't want to solve it. You demonize it. And we saw this, and Senator Vance, and it surprises me on this, talking about and saying, I will create stories to bring attention to this. That vilified a large number of people who were here legally in the community of Springfield. The Republican governor said, it's not true, don't do it. There's consequences for this. There's consequences. We could come together. Senator Lankford did it. We could come together and solve this if we didn't let Donald Trump continue to make it an issue. And the consequences in Springfield were the governor had to send state law enforcement to escort kindergartners to school. I believe Senator Vance wants to solve this, but by standing with Donald Trump and not working together to find a solution, it becomes a talking point. And when it becomes a talking point like this, we dehumanize and villainize other human beings.
Tim,
Governor, your time is up. Senator, I'll give you 1 minute, but let me just ask you the question first. The governor has made the point, and I think as a sitting lawmaker, you know that Congress controls the purse strings and any funding. So you have said repeatedly that Donald Trump would, through executive action, solve this? Do you disagree that Congress controls the purse strings and would need to support many of the changes that you would actually want to implement? You have 1 minute.
Look, Margaret, first of all, the gross majority of what we need to do at the southern border is just empowering law enforcement to do their job. I've been to the southern border more than our borders are. Kamala Harris has been, and it's actually heartbreaking because the Border Patrol agents, they just want to be empowered to do their job. Of course, additional resources would help, but most of this is about the president and the vice president empowering our law enforcement to say, if you try to come across the border illegally, you've got to stay in Mexico, you've got to go back through proper channels. Now, Governor Walz brought up the community of Springfield, and he's very worried about the things that I've said in Springfield. Look, in Springfield, Ohio, and in communities all across this country, you've got schools that are overwhelmed, you've got hospitals that are overwhelmed, you've got housing that is totally unaffordable because we brought in millions of illegal immigrants to compete with Americans for scarce homes. The people that I'm most worried about in Springfield, Ohio, are the American citizens who have had their lives destroyed by Kamala Harris's open border. It is a disgrace, Tim. And I actually think, I agree with you. I think you want to solve this problem, but I don't think that Kamala Harris does.
Senator, your time is up. Governor, you have 1 minute to respond.
Yeah, well, it is law enforcement that asked for the bill. They helped craft it. They're the ones that supported it. That's because they know we need to do this. Look, this issue of continuing to bring this up, of not dealing with it, of blaming migrants for everything. On housing, we could talk a little bit about Wall Street speculators buying up housing and making them less affordable, but it becomes a blame. Look, this bill also gives the money necessary to adjudicate. I agree, it should not take 7 years for an asylum claim to be done. This bill gets it done in 90 days. Then you start to make a difference in this, and you start to adhere to what we know, American principles. Look, I don't talk about my faith a lot, but Matthew 25:40 talks about, to the least amongst us you do unto me. I think that's true of most Americans. They simply want order to it. This bill does it. It's funded. It's supported by the people who do it, and it lets us keep our dignity about how we treat other people.
Thank you, Governor. And just to clarify for our viewers, Springfield, Ohio does have a large number of Haitian migrants who have legal status. Right. Temporary protected status.
Well, Margaret, but
thank you, Senator. We have so much to get to.
Margaret, I think it's important because
we're going to turn now to the economy. Thank you,
Margaret. The rules were that you guys weren't going to fact check, and since you're fact checking me, I think it's important to say what's actually going on. So there's an application called the CBP One app, where you can go on as an illegal migrant, apply for asylum or apply for parole, and be granted legal status at the wave of a Kamala Harris open border wand. That is not a person coming in, applying for a green card and waiting for 10 years. That is the facilitation of illegal immigration, Margaret, by our own leadership.
Thank you, Senator, for describing the legal process. We have so much to get to, Senator.
Those laws have been on the books since 1990.
Thank you, gentlemen.
The CBP One app has not been on the books since 1990. It's something that Kamala Harris created, Margaret.
Gentlemen, the audience can't hear you because your mics are cut. We have so much we want to get to. Thank you for explaining the legal process. Nora.
Thank you, Margaret. The economy is a top concern for voters. Each of your campaigns has released an economic plan, so let's talk about the specifics. Governor Walz, Vice President Harris unveiled a plan that includes billions in tax credits for manufacturing, housing, and a renewed child tax credit. The Wharton School says your proposals will increase the nation's deficit by $1.2 trillion. How would you pay for that without ballooning the deficit? Governor, I'll give you 2 minutes.
Yeah, thank you. And Kamala Harris and I do believe in the middle class because that's where we come from. We both grew up in that. We understand. So those of you out there listening tonight, you're hearing a lot of stuff back and forth, and it's good. It's healthy. That's what this is supposed to happen. You should be listening. How's this going to impact me? The bold forward plan that Kamala Harris put out there is talking about this housing issue. The one thing is there's 3 million new houses proposed under this plan with down payment assistance on the front end to get you in a house. A house is much more than just an asset to be traded somewhere. It's foundational to where you're at. And then making sure that the things you buy every day, whether they be prescription drugs or other things, that there's fairness in that. Look, the $35 insulin is a good thing, but it costs $5 to make insulin. They were charging $800 before this law went into effect. As far as the housing goes, I've seen it in Minnesota. 12% more houses in Minneapolis, prices went down on rent 4%. It's working. And then making sure tax cuts go to the middle class. $6,000 child tax credit, we have one in Minnesota, reduces childhood poverty by a third. We save money in the long run, and we do the right thing for families. And then getting businesses off the ground. The law as it stands right now is $5,000 tax credit for small business, increasing that to $50,000. Now, this is a philosophical difference between us. Donald Trump made a promise, and I'll give you this. He kept it. He took folks to Mar-a-Lago, said, you're rich as hell, I'm going to give you a tax cut. He gave the tax cuts that predominantly went to the top class. What happened there was an $8 trillion increase in the national debt, the largest ever. Now he's proposing a 20% consumption or sales tax on everything we bring in. Everyone agrees, including businesses, it would be destabilizing it, it would increase inflation and potentially lead to a recession. Look, this is simple for you. Where are we going? Kamala Harris has said to do the things she wants to do, we'll just ask the wealthiest to pay their fair share. When you do that, our system works best, more people are participating in it, and folks have the things that they need.
Senator, I want to give you a moment to respond on that. But similarly, the Wharton School has done an analysis of the Trump plan and says it would increase the nation's deficit by $5.8 trillion. My question is the same for you. How do you pay for all that without ballooning the deficit? I'll give you 2 minutes.
Well, first of all, you're going to hear a lot from Tim Walz this evening, and you just heard it in the answer, a lot of what Kamala Harris proposes to do. And some of it, I'll be honest with you, it even sounds pretty good. Here's what you won't hear, is that Kamala Harris has already done it. Because she's been the vice president for 3.5 years. She had the opportunity to enact all of these great policies, and what she's actually done instead is drive the cost of food higher by 25%, drive the cost of housing higher by about 60%, open the American southern border and make middle-class life unaffordable for a large number of Americans. If Kamala Harris has such great plans for how to address middle-class problems, then she ought to do them now. Not when asking for a promotion, but in the job the American people gave her 3.5 years ago. And the fact that she isn't tells you a lot about how much you can trust her actual plans. Now, Donald Trump's economic plan is not just a plan, but it's also a record. A lot of those same economists attack Donald Trump's plan, and they have PhDs, but they don't have common sense and they don't have wisdom, because Donald Trump's economic policies delivered the highest take-home pay in a generation in this country, 1.5% inflation, and to boot, peace and security all over the world. So when people say that Donald Trump's economic plan doesn't make sense, I say look at the record. He delivered rising take-home pay for American workers. Now, Tim admirably admits that they want to undo the Trump tax cuts, but if you look at what was so different about Donald Trump's tax cuts, even from previous Republican tax cut plans, is that a lot of those resources went to giving more take-home pay to middle-class and working-class Americans. It was passed in 2017, and you saw an American economic boom unlike we've seen in a generation in this country. That is a record that I'm proud to run on, and we're going to get back to that common sense wisdom so that you can afford to live the American dream again. I know a lot of you are struggling. I know a lot of you are worried about paying the bills. It's going to stop when Donald Trump brings back common sense to this country.
Governor, do you want to respond to that? What has Kamala Harris done for the middle class?
Yeah, well, Kamala Harris's day one was Donald Trump's failure on COVID that led to the collapse of our economy. We were already before COVID in a manufacturing recession, but 10 million people out of work, largest percentage since the Great Depression. 9 million jobs closed on that. That was day one. Whether it was the Infrastructure Act or other things we moved. Now, you made a question about experts, said this. I've made a note of this. Economists can't be trusted. Science can't be trusted. National security folks can't be trusted. Look, if you're going to be president, you don't have all the answers. Donald Trump believes he does. My pro tip of the day is this. If you need heart surgery, listen to the people at the Mayo Clinic in Rochester, Minnesota, not Donald Trump. And the same thing goes with this. And I ask you out there, teachers, nurses, truck drivers, or whatever, how is it fair that you're paying your taxes every year and Donald Trump hasn't paid any federal tax in the last 15 years, and the last year as president? That's what's wrong with the system. There's a way around it, and he's bragged about that. We're just asking for fairness in it, and that's all you want.
You have a minute.
Governor, you say trust the experts, but those same experts for 40 years said that if we shipped our manufacturing base off to China, we'd get cheaper goods. They lied about that. They said if we shipped our industrial base off to other countries, to Mexico and elsewhere, it would make the middle class stronger. They were wrong about that. They were wrong about the idea that if we made America less self-reliant, less productive in our own nation, that it would somehow make us better off, and they were wrong about it. And for the first time in a generation, Donald Trump had the wisdom and the courage to say to that bipartisan consensus, we're not doing it anymore. We're bringing American manufacturing back. We're unleashing American energy. We're going to make more of our own stuff. And this isn't just an economic issue. I mean, I've got 3 beautiful little kids at home, 7, 4, and 2, and I love them very much, and I hope they're in bed right now. But look, so many of the drugs, the pharmaceuticals that we put in the bodies of our children are manufactured by nations that hate us. This has to stop, and we're not going to stop it by listening to experts. We're going to stop it by listening to common sense wisdom, which is what Donald Trump governed on.
Senator, your time is up. Governor Walz, can you address that? I mean, voters say they trust Donald Trump on the economy more. Why?
Well, if you're listening tonight and you want billionaires to get tax cuts, you heard what the numbers were. Look, I'm a union guy on this. I'm not a guy who wanted to ship things overseas, but I understand that, look, we produce soybeans and corn. We need to have fair trading partners. That's something that we believe in. I think the thing that most concerns me on this is Donald Trump was the guy who created the largest trade deficit in American history with China. So the rhetoric is good. Much of what the senator said right there, I'm in agreement with him on this. I watched it happen too. I watched it to my communities, and we talked about that. But we had people undercutting the right to collectively bargain. We had right to work states made it more difficult. We had companies that were willing to ship it over, and we saw people profit. Folks that are venture capital in some cases, putting money into companies that were overseas. We're in agreement that we bring those home. The issue is Donald Trump is talking about it. Kamala Harris has a record, 250,000 more manufacturing jobs just out of the IRA.
May I respond to that?
Yes.
So appreciate that. So if you notice, what Governor Walz just did is he said, first of all, Donald Trump has to listen to the experts. And then when he acknowledged that the experts screwed up, he said, well, Donald Trump didn't do nearly as good of a job as the statistics
that's a gross generalization.
that he did. So what Tim Walz is doing, and I honestly, Tim, I think you got a tough job here, because you've got to play whack-a-mole. You've got to pretend that Donald Trump didn't deliver rising take-home pay, which of course he did. You've got to pretend that Donald Trump didn't deliver lower inflation, which of course he did. And then you've simultaneously got to defend Kamala Harris's atrocious economic record, which has made gas, groceries, and housing unaffordable for American citizens. I was raised by a woman who would sometimes go into medical debt so that she could put food on the table in our household. I know what it's like to not be able to afford the things that you need to afford. We can do so much better. To all of you watching, we can get back to an America that's affordable again. We just got to get back to common sense economic principles.
I hope we have a conversation on health care then.
Senator, Governor.
Please.
Thank you. Margaret?
We have a lot to get to ahead, gentlemen, on many topics. But right now, I want to talk about personal qualifications. The vice president is often the last voice the president hears before making consequential decisions. We want to ask you about your leadership qualities. Governor Walz, you said you were in Hong Kong during the deadly Tiananmen Square protests in the spring of 1989. But Minnesota Public Radio and other media outlets are reporting that you actually didn't travel to Asia until August of that year. Can you explain that discrepancy?
Yeah, well, and to the folks out there who didn't get at the top of this, look, I grew up in small rural Nebraska, town of 400, town that you rode your bike with your buddies till the streetlights come on, and I'm proud of that service. I joined the National Guard at 17, worked on family farms, and then I used the GI Bill to become a teacher, passionate about it, a young teacher. My first year out, I got the opportunity in the summer of '89 to travel to China. 35 years ago, be able to do that. I came back home and then started a program to take young people there. We would take basketball teams, we would take baseball teams, we would take dancers, and we would go back and forth to China. The issue for that was to try and learn. Now look, my community knows who I am. They saw where I was at. Look, I will be the first to tell you, I have poured my heart into my community. I've tried to do the best I can, but I've not been perfect. And I'm a knucklehead at times, but it's always been about that. Those same people elected me to Congress for 12 years. And in Congress, I was one of the most bipartisan people, working on things like farm bills that we got done, working on veterans benefits. And then the people of Minnesota were able to elect me to governor twice. So look, my commitment has been from the beginning to make sure that I'm there for the people, to make sure that I get this right. I will say more than anything, many times I will talk a lot. I will get caught up in the rhetoric. But being there, the impact it made, the difference it made in my life, I learned a lot about China. I hear the critiques of this. I would make the case that Donald Trump should have come on one of those trips with us. I guarantee you he wouldn't be praising Xi Jinping about COVID, and I guarantee you he wouldn't start a trade war that he ends up losing. So this is about trying to understand the world. It's about trying to do the best you can for your community, and then it's putting yourself out there and letting your folks understand what it is. My commitment, whether it be through teaching, which I was good at, or whether it was being a good soldier or was being a good member of Congress, those are the things that I think are the values that people care about.
Governor, just to follow up on that, the question was, can you explain the discrepancy?
All I said on this was I got there that summer and misspoke on this, so I will just, that's what I've said. So I was in Hong Kong and China during the democracy protests went in. And from that, I learned a lot of what needed to be in governance.
Thank you, Governor. Senator Vance, in 2016, you called your running mate Donald Trump unfit for the nation's highest office, and you said he could be America's Hitler. I know you've been asked many times, and you've said you regret those comments and explained you then voted for Donald Trump in 2020. But the Washington Post reported new messages last week in which you also disparaged Trump's economic record while he was president, writing to someone in 2020, quote, "Trump thoroughly failed to deliver his economic populism." You're now his running mate, and you've shifted many of your policy stances to align with his. If you become vice president, why should Americans trust that you will give Donald Trump the advice he needs to hear and not just the advice he wants to hear? You have 2 minutes.
Well, first of all, Margaret, because I've always been open. And sometimes, of course, I've disagreed with the president, but I've also been extremely open about the fact that I was wrong about Donald Trump. I was wrong, first of all, because I believed some of the media stories that turned out to be dishonest fabrications of his record. But most importantly, Donald Trump delivered for the American people. Rising wages, rising take-home pay, an economy that worked for normal Americans, a secure southern border, a lot of things, frankly, that I didn't think he'd be able to deliver on. And yeah, when you screw up, when you misspeak, when you get something wrong and you change your mind, you ought to be honest with the American people about it. It's one of the reasons, Margaret, why I've done so many interviews is because I think it's important to actually explain to the American people where I come down on the issues and what changed. Now, you pointed out the messages from 2020. Margaret, I've been extremely consistent that I think there were a lot of things that we could have done better in the Trump administration the first round if Congress was doing its job. I strongly believe, and I've been a United States Senator, that Congress is not just a high-class debating society. It's not just a forum for senators and congressmen to whine about problems. It's a forum to govern. So there were a lot of things on the border, on tariffs, for example, where I think that we could have done so much more if the Republican Congress and the Democrats in Congress had been a little bit better about how they govern the country. They were so obsessed with impeaching Donald Trump, they couldn't actually govern. And I want to talk about this tariff issue in particular, Margaret, because Tim just accused this of being a national sales tax. Look, the one thing, and you're probably surprised to hear me praising Joe Biden, but the one thing that Joe Biden did is he continued some of the Trump tariffs that protected American manufacturing jobs. And it's the one issue, the most pro-worker part of the Biden administration, it's the one issue where Kamala Harris has run away from Joe Biden's record. Think about this. If you're trying to employ slave laborers in China at $3 a day, you're going to do that and undercut the wages of American workers unless our country stands up for itself and says, you're not accessing our markets unless you're paying middle-class Americans a fair wage.
Senator, your time is up. Nora?
Thank you. Now to the issue of reproductive rights. Governor Walz, after Roe versus Wade was overturned, you signed a bill into law that made Minnesota one of the least restrictive states in the nation when it comes to abortion. Former President Trump said in the last debate that you believe abortion, quote, in the 9th month is absolutely fine. Yes or no? Is that what you support? I'll give you 2 minutes.
That's not what the bill says, but look, this issue is what's on everyone's mind. Donald Trump put this all into motion. He brags about how great it was that he put the judges in and overturned Roe versus Wade, 52 years of personal autonomy. And then he tells us, oh, we send it to the states. It's a beautiful thing. Amanda Zaworski would disagree with you on it's a beautiful thing. A young bride in Texas waiting for their child at 18 weeks. She has a complication, a tear in the membrane. She needs to go in. The medical care at that point needs to be decided by the doctor. And that would have been an abortion. But in Texas, that would have put them in legal jeopardy. She went home, got sepsis, nearly dies, and now she may have difficulty having children. Or in Kentucky, Hadley Duvall, a 12-year-old child raped and impregnated by her stepfather. Those are horrific. Now, when God asked about that, Senator Vance said, 2 wrongs don't make a right. There is no right in this. So in Minnesota, what we did was restore Roe versus Wade. We made sure that we put women in charge of their health care. But look, this is not where, if you don't know Amanda or a Hadley, you soon will. Their Project 2025 is going to have a registry of pregnancies. It's going to make it more difficult, if not impossible, to get contraception and limit access, if not eliminate access to infertility treatments. For so many of you out there listening, me included, infertility treatments are why I have a child. That's nobody else's business, but those things are being proposed. And the catch-all on this is, well, the states will decide what's right for Texas might not be right for Washington. That's not how this works. This is basic human right. We have seen maternal mortality skyrocket in Texas, outpacing many other countries in the world. This is about health care. In Minnesota, we are ranked first in health care for a reason. We trust women, we trust doctors.
Senator, do you want to respond to the governor's claim? Will you create a federal pregnancy monitoring agency?
No, Nora, certainly we won't. And I want to talk about this issue because I know a lot of Americans care about it, and I know a lot of Americans don't agree with everything that I've ever said on this topic. And, you know, I grew up in a working class family in a neighborhood where I knew a lot of young women who had unplanned pregnancies and decided to terminate those pregnancies because they feel like they didn't have any other options. And, you know, one of them is actually very dear to me. And I know she's watching tonight, and I love you. And she told me something a couple years ago that she felt like if she hadn't had that abortion, that it would have destroyed her life because she was in an abusive relationship. And I think that what I take from that as a Republican who proudly wants to protect innocent life in this country, who proudly wants to protect the vulnerable, is that my party, we've got to do so much better of a job at earning the American people's trust back on this issue where they frankly just don't trust us. And I think that's one of the things that Donald Trump and I are endeavoring to do. I want us as a Republican Party to be pro-family in the fullest sense of the word. I want us to support fertility treatments. I want us to make it easier for moms to afford to have babies. I want it to make it easier for young families to afford a home so they can afford a place to raise that family. And I think there's so much that we can do on the public policy front just to give women more options. Now, of course, Donald Trump has been very clear that on the abortion policy specifically, that we have a big country and it's diverse. And California has a different viewpoint on this than Georgia. Georgia has a different viewpoint from Arizona. And the proper way to handle this, as messy as democracy sometimes is to let voters make these decisions, let the individual states make their abortion policy. And I think that's what makes the most sense in a very big, a very diverse, and let's be honest, sometimes a very, very messy and divided country.
Governor, would you like to respond and also answer the question about restrictions?
Yeah, well, the question got asked and Donald Trump made the accusation that wasn't true about Minnesota. Well, let me tell you about this idea that there's diverse states. There's a young woman named Amber Thurman. She happened to be in Georgia, a restrictive state. Because of that, she had to travel a long distance to North Carolina to try and get her care. Amber Thurman died in that journey back and forth. The fact of the matter is, how can we as a nation say that your life and your rights, as basic as the right to control your own body, is determined on geography? There's a very real chance, had Amber Thurman lived in Minnesota, she would be alive today. That's why the restoration of Roe versus Wade. When you listen to Vice President Harris talk about this subject and you hear me talk about it, you hear us talking exactly the same. Donald Trump is trying to figure out how to get the political right of this. I agree with a lot of what Senator Vance said about what's happening. His running mate, though, does not, and that's the problem.
Governor, your time is up. Senator, let me ask you about that. He mentioned, was, I think, referring to a national ban. In the past, you have supported a federal ban on abortion after 15 weeks. In fact, you said if someone can't support legislation like that, quote, you are making the United States the most barbaric pro-abortion regime anywhere in the entire world. My question is, why have you changed your position?
Well, Nora, first of all, I never supported a national ban. I did when I was running for Senate in 2022 talk about setting some minimum national standard. For example, we have a partial birth abortion ban in place in this country at the federal level. I don't think anybody's trying to get rid of that, or at least I hope not, though I know that Democrats have taken a very radical pro-abortion stance. But Nora, you know, one of the things that changed is in the state of Ohio, we had a referendum in 2023, and the people of Ohio voted overwhelmingly, by the way, against my position. And I think that what I learned from that, Nora, is that we've got to do a better job at winning back people's trust. So many young women would love to have families. So many young women also see an unplanned pregnancy as something that's going to destroy their livelihood, destroy their education, destroy their relationships. And we have got to earn people's trust back. And that's why Donald Trump and I are committed to pursuing pro-family policies, making childcare more accessible, making fertility treatments more accessible, because we've got to do a better job at that. And that's what real leadership is.
Governor, your response.
Well, I'm going to respond on the pro-abortion piece of that. No, we're not. We're pro-women. We're pro-freedom to make your own choice. We know what the implications are to not be that. Women having miscarriages, women not getting the care, physicians feeling like they may be prosecuted for providing that care. And as far as making sure that we're educating our children and giving them options, Minnesota's a state with one of the lowest teen pregnancy rates. We understand that too. We know that the options need to be available, and we make that true. We also make it, we're a top 3 state for the best place to raise children. But these two things, to try and say that we're pro-children but we don't like this, or you guys are pro-abortion, that's not the case at all. We are pro-freedoms for women to make their choices, and we're going, and Kamala Harris is making the case, to make options for children more affordable, a $6,000 child tax credit, but we're not going to base that on the backs of making someone like Amber Thurman drive 600 miles to try and get health care.
Senator?
May I respond to that? First of all, Governor, I agree with you. Amber Thurman should still be alive, and there are a lot of people who should still be alive, and I certainly wish that she was. And maybe you're free to disagree with me on this and explain this to me, but as I read the Minnesota law that you signed into law, the statute that you signed into law, it says that a doctor who presides over an abortion where the baby survives, the doctor is under no obligation to provide life-saving care to a baby who survives a botched late-term abortion. That is, I think, whether you're pro-choice or pro-abortion, that is fundamentally barbaric. And that's why I use that word, Nora, is because some of what we've seen, do you want to force Catholic hospitals to perform abortions against their will? Because Kamala Harris has supported suing Catholic nuns to violate their freedom of conscience. We can be a big and diverse country where we respect people's freedom of conscience and make the country more pro-baby and pro-family. But please.
Yes, Governor, please respond.
Look, this is one where there's always something there. This is a very simple proposition. These are women's decisions to make about their health care decisions, and the physicians who know best when they need to do this. Trying to distort the way a law is written to try and make a point, that's not it at all.
What was I wrong about, Governor? Please tell me, what was I wrong about?
That is not the way the law is written. Look, I've given I've given this advice on a lot of things, that getting involved, getting engaged, that's been misread, and it was fact-checked at the last debate. But the point on this is there's a continuation of these guys to try and tell women or to get involved. I use this line on this, just mind your own business on this. Things worked best when Roe versus Wade was in place. When we do a restoration of Roe, that works best. That doesn't preclude us from increasing funding for children. It doesn't increase us from making sure that once that child's born, like in Minnesota, they get meals, they get early childhood education, they get health care. So the hiding behind we're going to do all these other things when you're not proposing them in your budget. Kamala Harris is proposing them. She's proposing all those things to make life easier for families.
I asked a specific question, Governor. You gave me a slogan as a response.
It's not the case. It's not true. That's not what the law says. So they fact-checked it with President Trump.
Gentlemen, there's a lot to discuss. We have to move on, and we're going to be right back with much more of the CBS News vice presidential debate in just a moment.
We are back now with tonight's vice presidential debate.
When it ends, join us for analysis. Now, back to the debate.
To the CBS News vice presidential debate. We want to turn now to America's gun violence epidemic. The leading cause of death for children and teens in America is by firearms. Senator Vance, you oppose most gun legislation that Democrats claim would curb gun violence. You oppose red flag gun laws and legislation to ban certain semi-automatic rifles, including AR-15s. So let me ask you, earlier this year, for the first time, the parents of a school shooter were convicted of involuntary manslaughter and sentenced to 10 years in prison. Do you think holding parents responsible could curb mass shootings? I'll give you 2 minutes.
Yeah, well, Nora, on that particular case, I don't know the full details, but I certainly trust local law enforcement and local authorities to make those decisions. I think in some cases the answer is going to be yes, and in some cases the answer is going to be no. And the details really matter here, of course. For example, if a kid steals a gun, that's going to be different than if a parent hands over a gun knowing that their kid is potentially dangerous. But look, I want to just sort of speak as a father of 3 beautiful little kids, and our oldest is now in 2nd grade. And like a lot of parents, we send our kids to school with such hope and such joy and such pride at their little faces on the first day of school. And we know, unfortunately, that a lot of kids are going to experience this terrible epidemic of gun violence. And of course, our hearts go out to the families that are affected by this terrible stuff. And we do have to do better. And I think that Governor Walz and I actually probably agree that we need to do better on this. The question is just, how do we actually do it? Now, here's something that really bothers me and worries me about this epidemic of violence. The gross majority, close to 90% in some of the statistics I've seen, of the gun violence in this country is committed with illegally obtained firearms. And while we're on that topic, we know that thanks to Kamala Harris's open border, we've seen a massive influx in the number of illegal guns run by the Mexican drug cartels. So that number, the amount of illegal guns in our country is higher today than it was 3.5 years ago. But what do we do about the schools? What do we do to protect our kids? And I think the answer is, and I say this not loving the answer, because I don't want my kids to go to school in a school that feels unsafe or where there are visible signs of security. But I unfortunately think that we have to increase security in our schools. We have to make the doors lock better. We have to make the doors stronger. We've got to make the windows stronger. And of course, we've got to increase school resource officers, because the idea that we can magically wave a wand and take guns out of the hands of bad guys, it just doesn't fit with recent experience. So we've got to make our schools safer. And I think we've got to have some common sense bipartisan solutions for how to do that.
Governor, you have 2 minutes.
Well, I think all the parents watching tonight, this is your biggest nightmare. Look, I got a 17-year-old, and he witnessed a shooting at a community center playing volleyball. Those things don't leave you. As a member of Congress, I sat in my office surrounded by dozens of the Sandy Hook parents, and they were looking at my 7-year-old picture on the wall. Their 7-year-old were dead, and they were asking us to do something. And look, I'm a hunter. I own firearms. The vice president is. We understand that the Second Amendment is there, but our first responsibility is to our kids to figure this out. In Minnesota, we've enacted enhanced red flag laws, enhanced background checks, and we can start to get data. But here's the problem. If we really want to solve this, we've got folks that won't allow research to be even done on gun violence. And this idea that we should just live with it, and here's what I do think, that this is a good start to the conversation. I 100% believe that Senator Vance hates it when these kids, it's abhorrent and it breaks your heart. I agree with that. But that's not far enough when we know there are things that work. I've spent time in Finland and seen some Finnish schools. They don't have this happen, even though they have a high gun ownership rate in the country. There are reasonable things that we can do to make a difference. It's not infringing on your Second Amendment. And the idea to have some of these weapons out there, it just doesn't make any sense. Kamala Harris, as an attorney general, worked on this issue. She knows that it's there. No one's trying to scaremonger and say we're taking your guns, but I ask all of you out there, do you want your schools hardened to look like a fort? Is that what we have to go when we know there's countries around the world that their children aren't practicing these types of drills? They're being kids. We owe it to them to get a fix. These are things that shouldn't be that difficult. You can still keep your firearms, and we can make a difference. We have to. If you're listening tonight, this breaks your heart.
Senator.
Tim, first of all, I didn't know that your 17-year-old witnessed a shooting. I'm sorry about that, and I hope that he's doing okay. Christ have mercy. It is awful. And I appreciate what Tim said, actually, about Finland, because I do think it illustrates some of the frankly, weird differences between our own country's gun violence problem and Finland. Okay, first of all, we have way higher rates of mental health abuse, or mental health substance abuse. We have way higher rates of depression, way higher rates of anxiety. We unfortunately have a mental health crisis in this country that I really do think that we need to get to the root causes of, because I don't think it's the whole reason why we have such a bad gun violence problem, but I do think it's a big piece of it. Another driver of the gun violence epidemic, especially that affecting our kids, it doesn't earn as many headlines, but is the terrible gun violence problem in a lot of our big cities. And this is why we have to empower law enforcement to arrest the bad guys, put them away, and take gun offenders off the streets. I think there's a whole host of things that we can do here, but I do think at our schools we've got to talk about more security.
Senator, thank you. Governor, you previously opposed an assault weapons ban, but it's only later in your political career did you change your position. Why?
Yeah, I sat in that office with those Sandy Hook parents. I've become friends with school shooters. I've seen it. Look, the NRA, I was the NRA guy for a long time. They used to teach gun safety. I'm of an age where my shotgun was in my car so I could pheasant hunt after football practice. That's not where we live today. And several things I want to mention on this is, talking about cities and where it's at, the number one where the most firearm deaths happen in Minnesota are rural suicides. And we have an epidemic of children getting guns and shooting themselves. And so we have, and we should look at all of the issues, making sure folks have health care and all that, but I want to be very careful. This idea of stigmatizing mental health, just because you have a mental health issue doesn't mean you're violent. And I think what we end up doing is we start looking for a scapegoat. Sometimes it just is the guns. It's just the guns, and there are things that you can do about it. But I do think that this is one, and I think this is a healthy conversation. I think there's a capacity to find solutions on this that work, protect Second Amendment, protect our children. That's our priority.
Gentlemen, thank you. Margaret?
Thank you, Nora. Let's turn now to the top contributor to inflation, the high cost of housing and rent. There's a shortage of more than 4 million homes in the United States, and that contributes to the high housing prices. Governor Walz, the Harris campaign promises a $25,000 down payment assistance for first-time home buyers and a $10,000 tax credit. They also promise to build 3 million new homes. Where are you building these homes, and won't handing out that kind of money just drive up prices higher?
No, it's not handing out. We have, first, let me say this issue of housing, and I think those of you listening on this, the problem we've had is that we've got a lot of folks that see housing as another commodity. It can be bought up, it can be shifted, it can be moved around. Those are not folks living in those houses. Those of you listening tonight, that house is a big deal. I bought and owned one house in my life. My mom still lives in the house where I was. And when I think of a house, I'm thinking of Christmas services after midnight mass where you go with your family. We need to make it more affordable. And one of the things, as I said, this program that the Vice President is pushing forward and bringing a new way of approaching this is something we're doing in Minnesota from that lead. We in the state invested in making sure our housing was the biggest investment that we'd ever made in housing. It starts to make it easier. We cut some of the red tape. Local folks, look, we can't do it at the federal level, but local folks make it easier to build those homes. And then that down payment assistance. I can tell all of you out there, one of the, certainly for me, using the GI Bill was one thing, but a veteran's home loan, the big thing about a veteran's home loan is you don't have to pay the down payment. Those are things that make it there. Now, look, you're going to pay it back, and you're going to pay your mortgage. Those are things that we know in the long run, the appreciated value, the generational wealth that's created from it. And I will give Minneapolis an example. Minneapolis is the one city where we've seen the lowest inflation rates. We've seen a 12% increase in stock because we've put some of these things in, and we're implementing a state program to make sure we give some of that down payment assistance. We get it back from people because here's what we know. People with stable housing end up with stable jobs. People with stable housing have their kids able to get to school. All of those things in the long run end up saving our money. And that's the thing that I think we should be able to find some common ground in, but we can't blame immigrants for the only reason. That's not the case that's happening in many cities. The fact of the matter is that we don't have enough naturally affordable housing, but we can make sure that the government's there to help kickstart it, create that base.
Governor, your time is up. Senator Vance, as far as your campaign's position, the promise is to seize federal lands to build homes, remove regulation, provide tax breaks, and cut back on immigration, which you say pushes up prices. Where are you going to build all the new homes you're promising, and what part of any of this plan will provide immediate relief? You have 2 minutes.
Well, first of all, Tim just said something that I agree with. We don't want to blame immigrants for higher housing prices, but we do want to blame Kamala Harris for letting in millions of illegal aliens into this country, which does drive up costs, Tim. 25 million illegal aliens competing with Americans for scarce homes is one of the most significant drivers of home prices in the country. It's why we have massive increases in home prices that have happened right alongside massive increases in illegal alien populations under Kamala Harris's leadership. Now, Tim just mentioned a bunch of ideas. Now, some of those ideas I actually think are halfway decent, and some of them I disagree with, but the most important thing here is Kamala Harris is not running as a newcomer to politics. She is the sitting vice president. If she wants to enact all of these policies to make housing more affordable, I invite her to use the office that the American people already gave her, not sit around and campaign and do nothing while Americans find the American dream of homeownership completely unaffordable. Now, you asked, Margaret, what would immediately change the equation for American citizens? If you lower energy prices, as Donald Trump says, drill, baby, drill, one of the biggest drivers of housing costs aside from illegal immigration is, think about it, if a truck driver's paying 40% more for diesel, then the lumber he's delivering to the job site to build the house is also going to become a lot more expensive. If we open up American energy, you will get immediate pricing relief for American citizens, not, by the way, just in housing, but in a whole host of other economic goods, too.
Senator Vance, you still have 23 seconds there. Do you want to answer?
Can I have it?
Where, Governor, we will get to you in a moment. But, Senator, where are you going to seize the federal lands? Can you clarify?
Well, what Donald Trump has said is we have a lot of federal lands that aren't being used for anything. They're not being used for national park. They're not being used, and they could be places where we build a lot of housing. And I do think that we should be opening up building in this country. We have a lot of land that could be used. We have a lot of Americans that need homes. We should be kicking out illegal immigrants who are competing for those homes, and we should be building more homes for the American citizens who deserve to be here.
Senator, your time is up. Governor, I do want to let you respond to the allegation that the vice president is letting in
Well, of course, that's not true. And again, you have the facts. I guess we agreed not to fact check. I'll check it. That, look, crossings are down compared to when Donald Trump left office. But it's, again, blaming and not trying to find the solution. I was going to ask, though, on this question, are we going to drill and build houses in the same federal land? And I think when people hear federal lands, these are really important pieces of land. Now, Minnesota doesn't have a lot of federal lands. I know in the western part of the countries we do. There's not a lot of federal lands in and around Minneapolis, for example. So the issue is I don't understand the federal lands issue unless we see this, and I worry about this as someone who cares deeply about our national parks and our federal lands. Look, Minnesota, we protect these things. We've got about 20% of the world's fresh water. These lands protect. They're there for a reason. They belong to all of us. But again, this is when you view housing and you view these things as commodities. Like, there's a chance to make money here. Let's take this federal land and let's sell it to people for that. I think there's better ways to do this. We've seen it in Minnesota. We're able to refurbish some of these houses. We're able to make some investments. That gets people in. And I'm still on the fact on this. Economists, Senator Vance, you said you don't like the economists. Which economists are saying that it is immigrants that's adding to the cost?
Governor, your time is up. But Senator, on that point, I'd like for you to clarify. There are many contributing factors to high housing costs. What evidence do you have that migrants are part of this problem?
Well, there's a Federal Reserve study that we're happy to share after the debate. We'll put it up on social media, actually, that really drills down on the connection between increased levels of migration, especially illegal immigration, and higher housing prices. Now, of course, Margaret, that's not the entire driver of higher housing prices. It's also the regulatory regime of Kamala Harris. Look, we are a country of builders. We're a country of doers. We're a country of explorers. But we increasingly have a federal administration that makes it harder to develop our our resources, makes it harder to build things, and wants to throw people in jail for not doing everything exactly as Kamala Harris says they have to do. And what that means is that you have a lot of people who would love to build homes who aren't able to build homes. I actually agree with Tim Walz. We should get out of this idea of housing as a commodity, but the thing that has most turned housing into a commodity is giving it away to millions upon millions of people who have no legal right to be here.
What are the federal regulations? I deal with this as a governor.
You can very quickly reply.
I'm sorry. I get this as a governor, and I don't necessarily disagree with that in some cases, many of those are local, many of them are state. I don't know which ones are federal, but I think whenever we talk regulations, people think they can get rid of them. I think you want to be able to get out of your house in a fire. I think you want to make sure that it's fireproof and those types of things. So which are the regulations? Because the vice president's not responsible for those. Congress writes those.
Governor, thank you. Gentlemen, we have a lot to get to. You're passionate about the housing crisis, I can tell. But Nora?
Thank you. One of the top problems facing Americans is the high cost of health care. Senator Vance, at the last presidential debate, former President Trump was asked about replacing the Affordable Care Act. In response, he said, "I have concepts of a plan." Since then, Senator, you've talked about changing how chronically ill Americans get health insurance. Can you explain how that would work? And can you guarantee that Americans with pre-existing conditions won't pay more? I'll give you 2 minutes.
Well, of course, we're going to cover Americans with pre-existing conditions. In fact, a lot of my family members have gotten health care. I believe, members of my family actually got private health insurance, at least for the first time, switched off of Medicaid onto private insurance for the first time under Donald Trump's leadership. And I think that, a lot of people have criticized this concepts of a plan remark. Look, it's very simple common sense. I think as Tim Walz knows from 12 years in Congress, you're not going to propose a 900-page bill standing on a debate stage. It would bore everybody to tears, and it wouldn't actually mean anything because part of this is the give and take of bipartisan negotiation. Now, when Donald Trump was actually president, and again, he has a record to be proud of, prescription drugs fell in 2018 for the first time in a very long time. Under Kamala Harris's leadership, prescription drugs are up about 7%. Under Donald Trump's entire 4 years, they were up about 1.5%. He introduced pricing transparency. You think about healthcare, you go into a hospital, you try to buy something, and nobody knows what it actually costs. That price transparency will actually give American consumers a little bit more choice and will also drive down costs. And we talked about, the reinsurance regulations is what I was talking about. Look, Donald Trump has said that if we allow states to experiment a little bit on how to cover both the chronically ill but the non-chronically ill, it's not just a plan. He actually implemented some of these regulations when he was president of the United States. And I think you can make a really good argument that it salvaged Obamacare, which was doing disastrously until Donald Trump came along. And I think this is an important point about President Trump. Of course, you don't have to agree with everything that President Trump has ever said or ever done, but when Obamacare was crushing under the weight of its own regulatory burden and health care costs, Donald Trump could have destroyed the program. Instead, he worked in a bipartisan way to ensure that Americans had access to affordable care. It's not perfect, of course, and there's so much more that we can do, but I think that Donald Trump has earned the right to put in place some better health care policies. He's earned it because he did it successfully the first time.
Governor?
All right, here's where being an old guy gives you some history. I was there at the creation of the ACA. And the reason it was so important is I come from a major healthcare state, home of the Mayo Clinic, home to Medical Alley, 3M, Medtronic, all of those. We understand healthcare. It's why we're ranked first on affordability and accessibility and quality of healthcare. And so what I know is under Kamala Harris, more people are covered than they have before. And those of you listening, this is critical to you. Now, Donald Trump all of a sudden wants to. Go back and remember this. He ran on the first thing he was going to do on day one was to repeal Obamacare. On day one, he tried to sign an executive order to repeal the ACA. He signed on to a lawsuit to repeal the ACA, but lost at the Supreme Court. And he would have repealed the ACA had it not been for the courage of John McCain to save that bill. Now, fast forward, what that means to you is you lose your pre-existing conditions. If you're sitting at home and you got asthma, too bad. If you're a woman, probably not. Broke your foot during football, might kick you out. Your kids get kicked out when they're 26. Kamala Harris negotiated drug prices for the first time with Medicare. We have 10 drugs that will come online, the most common ones that'll be there. But look, this issue, and when Donald Trump said, I've got a concept of a plan, it cracked me up as a fourth grade teacher because my kids would have never given me that. But what Senator Vance just explained might be worse than a concept, because what he explained is pre-Obamacare. And I'll make this as simple as possible because I have done this for a long time. What they're saying is, if you're healthy, why should you be paying more? So what they're going to do is let insurance companies pick who they insure, because guess what happens? You pay your premium, it's not much. They figure they're not going to have to pay out to you. But those of you a little older, gray, got cancer, you're going to get kicked out of it. That's why the system didn't work. Kamala Harris will protect and enhance the ACA.
Governor, thank you. Senator, you have not yet explained how you would protect people with pre-existing conditions or laid out that plan.
Well, look, we currently have laws and regulations in place right now that protect people with pre-existing conditions. We want to keep those regulations in place, but we also want to make the health insurance marketplace function a little bit better. Now, what Governor Walz just said is actually not true. A lot of what happened, and the reason that Obamacare was crushing under its own weight, is that a lot of young and healthy people were leaving the exchanges. Donald Trump actually helped address that problem, and he did so in a way that preserved people's access to coverage who had pre-existing conditions. But again, something that these guys do is they make a lot of claims about if Donald Trump becomes president, all of these terrible consequences are going to ensue. But in reality, Donald Trump was president. Inflation was low. Take-home pay was higher. And he saved the very program from a Democratic administration that was collapsing and would have collapsed absent his leadership. He did his job, which is govern in a bipartisan way and get results, not just complain about problems, but actually solve them.
Governor, did enrollment under the Affordable Care Act go up under the Trump administration?
It's higher now that we've seen it go up. Look, people are using it. The system works. And the question about this of young people or whatever, that's the individual mandate piece of this. And Republicans fought tooth and nail saying, well, Americans should be free to do this. Well, then what happens is... So you think the individual mandate's a good idea? I think the idea of making sure the risk pool is broad enough to cover everyone, that's the only way insurance works. When it doesn't, it collapses. You are asking pre-ACA where we get people out. Look, people know that they need to be on health care. People expect it to be there. And when we are able to make it, and we are making it this way, when we incentivize people to be in the market, when we help people who might not be able to afford it get there, and we make sure then when you get sick and old, it's there for you. Because I heard people say, well, I don't want to buy into Medicare or whatever. Good luck buying health care once you get past 70. So look, the ACA works. We can continue to do better. Kamala Harris did that. The way she made everything better was negotiating those 10 drugs on Medicare for the first time in American history.
Thank you. Margaret.
Can I address that?
I apologize. We're out of time. We have a number of subjects to discuss. Margaret.
Let's talk about families in America. There is a child care crisis in this country, and the United States is one of the very few developed countries in the world without a national paid leave program for new parents. Governor Walz, you said that if Democrats win both the White House and Congress, this is a day one priority for you. How long should employers be required to pay workers while they are home taking care of their newborns? You have 2 minutes.
Yeah, well, that's negotiable, and that's what Congress worked. But here's what the deal is. Americans sitting out there right now, you may work for a big company. Look, we're home in Minnesota to some of the largest Fortune 500 companies. Kamala Harris knows that in California. Those companies provide paid family medical leave. One is, I think they're moral and they think it's a good thing, but it also keeps their employees healthy. We in Minnesota passed a paid family medical leave. You have a child, and I had to go back to work 5 days after my kids were born. This allows you to stay home a certain amount of time. What we know is that gets the child off to a better start, the family works better, we stay in their employers, we get more consistency in that. So Kamala Harris has made it a priority. We implemented it in Minnesota, and we see growth. That's how you become a pro-business state. But the negotiations on it, and here's the issue, those big companies are able to offer it. Those of you out there who don't have it, just imagine what happens if you get cancer or your child gets sick. We know what happens. You end up staying home. In some places, that means no paycheck because you've got no protection on that. This is the case of an economy that Donald Trump has set for the wealthiest amongst us. He's willing to give those tax breaks to the wealthiest. He's willing to say, bust those unions up, do whatever. What we're saying is the economy works best when it works for all of us. And so a paid family medical leave program, and I will tell you, go to the families or go to the businesses and ask them. As far as childcare on this, you have to take it at both the supply and the demand side. You can't expect the most important people in our lives to take either our children or our parents to get paid the least amount of money. And we have to make it easier for folks to be able to get into that business and then to make sure that folks are able to pay for that. We were able to do it in Minnesota, and I'm still telling you this. We were listed as the best state. We're still in crisis on this. A federal program of paid family and medical leave and help with this will enhance our workforce, enhance our families, and make it easier to have the children that you want.
Governor, your time is up. Senator, do you support a national paid leave program? And if so, for how long should employers be mandated to pay their employees while they are home taking care of their newborn? You have 2 minutes.
Yeah, well, first of all, Margaret, a number of my Republican colleagues and some Democrats, too, have worked on this issue. And I think there is a bipartisan solution here because a lot of us care about this issue. I mean, look, I speak from this very personally because I'm married to a beautiful woman who is an incredible mother to our 3 beautiful kids, but is also a very, very brilliant corporate litigator. And I'm so proud of her. But being a working mom, even for somebody with all of the advantages of my wife, is extraordinarily difficult. And it's not just difficult from a policy perspective. She actually had access to paid family leave because she worked for a bigger company, but the cultural pressure on young families and especially young women, I think makes it really hard for people to choose the family model they want. A lot of young women would like to go back to work immediately. Some would like to spend a little time home with the kids. Some would like to spend longer at home with the kids. We should have a family care model that makes choice possible. And I think this is a very important substantive difference between Donald Trump and Kamala Harris's approach. I mean, look, if you look at the federal programs that we have that support paid family leave right now, the Community Development Block Grant, and there's another block grant program that spends a lot of money from the federal government. These programs only go to one kind of child care model. Let's say you'd like your church maybe to help you out with child care. Maybe you live in a rural area or an urban area and you'd like to get together with families in your neighborhood to provide child care in the way that makes the most sense. You don't get access to any of these federal monies. We want to promote choice in how we deliver family care and how we promote child care, because look, it is unacceptable. And, you know, of course, Tim and I have been on the campaign trail a lot the past 7 or 8 weeks. And one of the biggest complaints I hear from young families is people who feel like they don't have options, like they're choosing between going to work or taking care for their kids. That is an incredible burden to put on American families. We're the only country that does it. I think we could do a heck of a lot better.
Senator, thank you. You have also said, Senator Vance, many things about the American family. The Federal Reserve says parents will spend nearly as much on child care as they do on housing each month. So I want to get your thoughts on this. President Trump recently said, as much as child care is talked about as being expensive, it's relatively speaking not very expensive compared to the kinds of numbers we'll be taking in. Is President Trump committed to the $5,000 per child tax credit that you have described? You have 1 minute.
Well, what President Trump said, Margaret, I just want to defend my running mate here a little bit, is that we're going to be taking in a lot of money by penalizing companies for shipping jobs overseas and penalizing countries who employ slave laborers and then ship their products back into our country and undercut the wages of American workers. It's the heart of the Donald Trump economic plan. Cut taxes for American workers and American families. Cut taxes for businesses that are hiring and building companies in the United States of America, but penalize companies and countries that are shipping jobs overseas. That's the heart of the economic proposal. And I think what President Trump is saying is that when we bring in this additional revenue with higher economic growth, we're going to be able to provide paid family leave, child care options that are viable and workable for a lot of American families.
Can you clarify how that will solve the child care shortage?
Well, because as Tim said, a lot of the child care shortage is we just don't have enough resources going into the multiple people who could be providing family care options. And we're going to have to, unfortunately, look, we're going to have to spend more money. We're going to have to induce more people to want to provide child care options for American families, because the reason it's so expensive right now is because you've got way too few people providing this very essential service.
Thank you, Senator. Governor Walz, your ticket also has some child care tax credit proposals. Do you think Congress will agree to the $6,000 credit for newborns and $3,000 credit for children over the age of 6, as your campaign has promised? Is that realistic?
Well, if these members of Congress are listening to anybody, I can tell you, and this is the biggest issue. Everybody listening tonight knows. I mean, I'm sure they were shocked to hear it's not that expensive. And let's be clear, whether it's $5,000 or $6,000, that pays you about 3 or 4 months. Let's be clear of where we're at on this. It's because we got out of an imbalance on this. We thought we were going to get by not paying people. I don't think Senator Vance and I are that far apart. I'm not opposed to what he's talking about on options. We've done scholarships types of things. I think we need to be open to making the case. But the issue here is, the question you asked is, you're not going to pay for it with these tariffs. That's just adding another $4,000 on the family and taking less. So not only do they not get the money to pay for that, they're $4,000 in the hole. That's Wharton School. That's his alma mater. And so I think the issue here is, if those members of Congress, I can't believe they're not here. When I go to businesses, sure, they'll talk about taxes sometime, but they will lead with childcare and they will lead with housing, because we know the problem is, especially in a state like Minnesota, we need more workers because our economy's growing, but we need the workforce.
Governor, thank you. We need to move on. Nora?
Let's talk about the state of democracy, the top issue for Americans after the economy and inflation. After the 2020 election, President Trump's campaign and others filed 62 lawsuits contesting the results. Judges, including those appointed by President Trump and other Republican presidents, looked at the evidence and said there was no widespread fraud. The governors of every state in the nation, Republicans and Democrats, certified the 2020 election results and sent a legal slate of electors to Congress for January 6th. Senator Vance, you have said you would not have certified the last presidential election and would have asked the states to submit alternative electors. That has been called unconstitutional and illegal. Would you again seek to challenge this year's election results, even if every governor certifies the results? I'll give you 2 minutes.
Well, Nora, first of all, I think that we're focused on the future. We need to figure out how to solve the inflation crisis caused by Kamala Harris's policies, make housing affordable, make groceries affordable, and that's what we're focused on. But I want to answer your question because you did ask it. Look, what President Trump has said is that there were problems in 2020, and my own belief is that we should fight about those issues, debate those issues peacefully in the public square, and that's all I've said, and that's all that Donald Trump has said. Remember, he said that on January the 6th, the protesters ought to protest peacefully. And on January the 20th, what happened? Joe Biden became the president, Donald Trump left the White House, and now, of course, unfortunately, we have all of the negative policies that have come from the Harris-Biden administration. I believe that we actually do have a threat to democracy in this country, but unfortunately, it's not the threat to democracy that Kamala Harris and Tim Walz want to talk about. It is the threat of censorship. It's Americans casting aside lifelong friendships because of disagreements over politics. It's big technology companies silencing their fellow citizens. And it's Kamala Harris saying that rather than debate and persuade her fellow Americans, she'd like to censor people who engage in misinformation. I think that is a much bigger threat to democracy than anything that we've seen in this country in the last 4 years, in the last 40 years. Now, I'm really proud, especially given that I was raised by 2 lifelong blue-collar Democrats, to have the endorsement of Bobby Kennedy Jr. and Tulsi Gabbard, lifelong leaders in the Democratic coalition. And of course, they don't agree with me and Donald Trump on every issue. We don't have to agree on every issue, but we're united behind a basic American First Amendment principle that we ought to debate our differences. We ought to argue about them. We ought to try to persuade our fellow Americans. Kamala Harris is engaged in censorship at an industrial scale. She did it during COVID. She's done it over a number of other issues, and that to me is a much bigger threat to democracy than what Donald Trump said when he said that protesters should peacefully protest on January the 6th.
Governor?
Well, I've enjoyed tonight's debate, and I think there was a lot of commonality here, and I'm sympathetic to misspeaking on things, and I think I might have with the senator.
Me too, man.
There's one though that this one is troubling to me, and I say that because I think we need to tell the story. Donald Trump refused to acknowledge this, and the fact is that I don't think we can be the frog in the pot and let the boiling water go up. He was very clear. I mean, he lost this election, and he said he didn't. 140 police officers were beaten at the Capitol that day, some with the American flag, several later died. And it wasn't just in there. In Minnesota, a group gathered on the state capitol grounds in St. Paul and said, we're marching to the governor's residence and there may be casualties. The only person there was my son and his dog, who was rushed out crying by state police. That issue, and Mike Pence standing there as they were chanting, hang Mike Pence. Mike Pence made the right decision. So, Senator, it was adjudicated over and over and over. I worked with kids long enough to know, and I said as a football coach, sometimes you really want to win, but the democracy is bigger than winning an election. You shake hands, and then you try and do everything you can to help the other side win. That's what was at stake here. Now, the thing I'm most concerned about is the idea that imprisoning your political opponents, already laying the groundwork for people not accepting this. And a president's words matter. A president's words matter. People hear that. So I think this issue of settling our differences at the ballot box, shaking hands when we lose, being honest about it, but to deny what happened on January 6th, the first time in American history that a president or anyone tried to overturn a fair election and the peaceful transfer of power. And here we are 4 years later in the same boat. I will tell you this, that when this is over, we need to shake hands this election, and the winner needs to be the winner. This has got to stop. It's tearing our country apart.
Margaret? Senator Vance, did you want to respond to that?
Yeah, well, look, Tim, first of all, it's really rich for Democratic leaders to say that Donald Trump is a unique threat to democracy when he peacefully gave over power on January the 20th, as we have done for 250 years in this country. We are going to shake hands after this debate and after this election. And of course, I hope that we win, and I think we're going to win. But if Tim Walz is the next vice president, he'll have my prayers, he'll have my best wishes, and he'll have my help whenever he wants it. But we have to remember that for years in this country, Democrats protested the results of elections. Hillary Clinton in 2016 said that Donald Trump had the election stolen by Vladimir Putin because the Russians bought like $500,000 worth of Facebook ads. This has been going on for a long time. And if we want to say that we need to respect the results of the election, I'm on board. But if we want to say, as Tim Walz is saying, that this is just a problem that Republicans have had, I don't buy that.
Governor.
January 6th was not Facebook ads. And I think a revisionist history on this. Look, I don't understand how we got to this point. But the issue was that happened. Donald Trump can do it. And all of us say there's no place for this. It has massive repercussions. This idea that there's censorship to stop people from threatening to kill someone, threatening to do something, that's not censorship. Censorship is book banning. We've seen that. We've seen that brought up. I just think for everyone tonight, and I'm going to thank Senator Vance. I think this is the conversation they want to hear. And I think there's a lot of agreement, but this is one that we are miles apart on. This was a threat to our democracy in a way that we had not seen. And it manifested itself because of Donald Trump's inability to say. He is still saying he didn't lose the election. I would just ask that. Did he lose the 2020 election?
Tim, I'm focused on the future. Did Kamala Harris censor Americans from speaking their mind in the wake of the 2020 COVID situation?
That is a damning non-answer.
It's a damning non-answer for you to not talk about censorship. Obviously, Donald Trump and I think that there were problems in 2020. We've talked about it. I'm happy to talk about it further. But you guys attack us for not believing in democracy. The most sacred right under the United States democracy is the First Amendment. You yourself have said there's no First Amendment right to misinformation. Kamala Harris wants to use the power of government and big tech to silence people from speaking their minds. That is a threat to democracy that will long outlive this present political moment. I would like Democrats and Republicans to both reject censorship. Let's persuade one another. Let's argue about ideas, and then let's come together afterwards.
You can't yell fire in a crowded theater. That's the test. That's the Supreme Court test.
Tim, fire in a crowded theater. You guys wanted to kick people off of Facebook for saying that toddlers shouldn't wear masks.
Senator, the governor does have the floor.
Fire in a crowded theater. That is criticizing the policies of the government, which is the right of every American.
Senator, the governor does have the floor for 1 minute to respond to you.
Yeah. Well, I don't run Facebook. What I do know is I see a candidate out there who refused, and now again, and this, I'm pretty shocked by this. He lost the election. This is not a debate. It's not anything anywhere other than in Donald Trump's world. Because look, when Mike Pence made that decision to certify that election, that's why Mike Pence isn't on this stage. What I'm concerned about is, where is the firewall with Donald Trump? Where is the firewall if he knows he could do anything, including taking an election, and his vice president's not going to stand to it? That's what we're asking you, America. Will you stand up? Will you keep your oath of office, even if the president doesn't? And I think Kamala Harris would agree. She wouldn't have picked me if she didn't think I would do that, because of course that's what we would do. So, America, I think you've got a really clear choice on this election of who's going to honor that democracy and who's going to honor Donald Trump.
Governor, your time is up. Thank you, gentlemen. We will be right back with both of our candidates. The CBS News vice presidential debate continues.
And we are back with tonight's vice presidential debate.
When it ends, join us right here, analysis. But now, back to the debate.
Welcome back to the CBS News vice presidential debate. It is now time for the closing statement. Senator Vance won the virtual coin toss and elected to go last. So, Governor Walz, you are first. You have 2 minutes.
Well, thank you, Senator Vance. Thank you to CBS News. And most importantly, thank you to all of you. If you're still up and the folks who miss Dancing with Our Stars, I appreciate it. But look, the support of the democracy matters. It matters that you're here. And I'm as surprised as anybody of this coalition that Kamala Harris has built, from Bernie Sanders to Dick Cheney to Taylor Swift, and a whole bunch of folks in between there. And they don't all agree on everything, but they are truly optimistic people. They believe in a positive future of this country, and one where our politics can be better than it is. And I have to tell you, that better than it is the sense of optimism that there can be an opportunity economy that works for everyone, not just to get by, but to get ahead. And the idea that freedom really means something. Not the freedom of government to be in your bedroom or exam room, but the freedom for you to make choices about yourself. Now, look, we all know who Donald Trump is. He's told us, and as Maya Angelou said, believe him when he told you that. His first inaugural address talked about American carnage, and then he spent 4 years trying to maybe do that. Senator Vance tonight made it clear he will stand with Donald Trump's agenda. He will continue to push down that road. Excuse me. Kamala Harris gives us a different option. Now, I'll have to tell you, I'm going to be careful about the quotes, but there's one that Senator Vance said that does resonate with me. He said, Donald Trump makes the people I care about afraid. A lot of America feels that way. We don't need to be afraid. Franklin Roosevelt was right. All we have to fear is fear itself. Kamala Harris is bringing us a new way forward. She's bringing us a politics of joy. She's bringing real solutions for the middle class, and she's centering you at the heart of that. All the while asking everyone, join this movement, make your voices heard. Let's look for a new day where everybody gets that opportunity and everybody gets a chance to thrive. I humbly ask for your vote on November 5th for Kamala Harris.
Governor Walz, thank you. Senator Vance, your closing statement.
Well, I want to thank Governor Walz, you folks at CBS, and of course the American people for tuning in this evening. And one of the issues we didn't talk about was energy. And I remember when I was being raised by my grandmother, when she didn't have enough money to turn on the heat some nights because Ohio gets pretty cold at night and because money was often very tight. And I believe, as a person who wants to be your next vice president, that we are a rich and prosperous enough country where every American, whether they're rich or poor, ought to be able to turn on their heat in the middle of a cold winter night. That's gotten more difficult thanks to Kamala Harris's energy policies. I believe that whether you're rich or poor, you ought to be able to afford a nice meal for your family. That's gotten harder because of Kamala Harris's policies. I believe that whether you're rich or poor, you ought to be able to afford to buy a house. You ought to be able to live in safe neighborhoods. You ought to not have your communities flooded with fentanyl, and that too has gotten harder with because of Kamala Harris's policies. Now, I've been in politics long enough to do what Kamala Harris does when she stands before the American people and says that on day one, she's going to work on all these challenges I just listed. She's been the vice president for 3.5 years. Day one was 1,400 days ago, and her policies have made these problems worse. Now, I believe that we have the most beautiful country in the world. I meet people on the campaign trail who can't afford food, but have the grace and generosity to ask me how I'm doing and to tell me they're praying for my family. What that has taught me is that we have the greatest country, the most beautiful country, the most incredible people anywhere in the world. But they're not going to be able to achieve their full dreams with the broken leadership that we have in Washington. They're not going to be able to live their American dream if we do the same thing that we've been doing for the last 3.5 years. We need change. We need a new direction. We need a president who has already done this once before and did it well. Please vote for Donald Trump. And whether you vote for me or vote for Tim Walz, I just want to say I'm so proud to be doing this, and I'm rooting for you. God bless you, and good night.
Senator Vance, thank you. And thank you both for participating in the only vice presidential debate of this election cycle. I'm Margaret Brennan.
And I'm Nora O'Donnell. And a reminder, there are just 35 days until Election Day. Please get out and vote. And for all of us here at CBS News, thank you and good night.
A handshake, and that's the end. Tim Walz, J.D. Vance squaring off for about 90 minutes in the heart of Midtown Manhattan, the CBS News studios, as their families come out to greet them after what was really a quite civilized debate. And I mean, perhaps that's one of the headlines we'll talk about as we turn to meet the press moderator, Kristen Welker, and Hallie Jackson, our senior Washington correspondent. Lester here still with me in New York City. I really am struck. We had kind of like a good old-fashioned policy debate on the issues. Didn't get nasty.
Look, by the way, they're still chatting.
Still chatting. Didn't get weird. You know, they took their shots, but it was earnest. And there were even moments of kind of congeniality and collegiality.
There were a number of moments where each of the candidates turned to each other and said, I agree with you. When Governor Walz said that his child had witnessed a shooting, you heard Senator Vance say, I'm so sorry that that happened. Look, zooming out, it was clear, I think, that Senator J.D. Vance knew his challenge tonight was to come off as more likable. I received a number of texts from Republicans and Democrats who say he was very effective at doing that. He's coming off as normal, even compassionate, even on the issue of abortion and economy, one Democrat said to me. And then at the end of the night, something very significant happened, which is that Governor Walz turned to Senator Vance and said, did Trump lose the 2020 election? Vance said, I'm focused on the future. Walz said, that's a damning answer. I do think
he said it's a damning non-answer.
Non-answer. And I do think that exchange and non-answer will in some ways loom very large over what Democrats and Republicans agree was a strong night for Senator Vance.
Hallie, what was the most memorable moment for you?
I think there were a few of them. I think the one that Kristen mentions is one of them. I think the idea that the mics were not muted at one point and then muted, and Senator Vance taking exception to that. Governor Walz calling himself kind of a knucklehead when asked to speak about an instance in which he says he misspoke about China, and an answer that was tough to follow there. I think overall, I was, like you, Lester, watching the two of them interact at the end there, because there was this sense of civility that we certainly did not see on that debate stage between the people at the top of the ticket here. What was also interesting here is the way that Senator Vance very specifically and repeatedly linked Kamala Harris to Tim Walz. Both of them seemed very clear that they know what this is about, right? This is about the principles. This isn't necessarily
even
about
at the end, they both said vote for Kamala Harris.
That's
vote
exactly
for Donald Trump.
And on the other side too. I mean, J.D. Vance said Kamala Harris's name 38 times. That is way more than Donald Trump ever said Kamala Harris's name.
A lot of people don't really know who these two men are.
Yeah, that's right. We talk about this being an introduction to America. You heard a lot of policy. You heard some substance there too. So you probably have some level of takeaway if you ended up watching for the full 90 minutes. But But I do think that as things move forward, I had one Democrat text me, listen, substantive, but also can't imagine this changes a whole lot in the race moving forward.
And I think the biography is important. That's why you heard both of them pause at various moments throughout the night to reintroduce themselves to Americans, to explain where they had come from, the fact that they both have served in the military, and to try to really paint themselves as people who can relate to moderates, to independents, to those suburban voters who are going to be
the closing moments, the closing arguments are always so interesting because that's the only thing they get to plan, rehearse, memorize if they want to. And they both struck a note of optimism about the future in the country. And with J.D. Vance, frankly, it was a stark contrast to what we hear from Donald Trump, who says this country is going to HE double toothpicks, you know, it's all terrible.
You can say the word.
Yeah, okay, hell, sorry. I know my kids were still awake. But, you know, it was interesting to see him strike that tone because it's in contrast to what we hear from Donald Trump every day.
And he himself just over the weekend said, yeah, this is a dark speech. I know that I'm giving a dark speech.
Donald
Trump did at a campaign rally he was at. He understands that that is the tone he's striking, and it was markedly different.
All right, let's see what other folks are thinking about what we've just witnessed. Kate Snow has been talking to a group of voters in battleground Pennsylvania. Kate, what's the consensus? What are you hearing?
Lester, it's really interesting. We've just been chatting since the debate ended. We are in Pennsylvania, right, guys? And we talked about how you feel the pressure that this is a swing area and that you could actually decide this election. So, Brian, let me start with you because you were really torn going in before the debate. You talked about not knowing exactly what you want to do. How are you feeling now?
You know, I feel like Walz probably hit it on the head a lot of times. It's probably 60-40.
60-40 for Harris?
For Harris, yeah. I feel like Vance sort of danced around a lot of questions. You know, it's not really going to. The vice president debate is really not going to have any kind of meaning on how I vote. But
as you sit here now, do you have more certainty about how you're going to vote, or not really?
No, not really. No. But I do think that Walz sort of he was really for the people, right? And Vance did a lot of deflecting and a lot of he just really wasn't sure. He kind of danced around answers. So
Brandon, you said you felt like Vance was just saying what were your words? He was saying things that people wanted to hear?
It sounded like he was saying things that people wanted to hear. He sounds like he was trying to be more human. This does not necessarily align to what he said before, in my opinion.
And you said that now you are feeling a little more certain about going with Harris. Am I reading that right?
Yes. Now it's October 1st. I think it's irresponsible to have this much uncertainty coming out of either side. Vance did nothing. He did not answer the question for me, and he made a lot of connections that weren't really there for me.
Claire, we were talking a lot afterwards about childcare, because there was that whole section toward the end of the debate about childcare, and you're really involved in this as a member of the community here. You're a mom. You're involved in policy discussions. What was your take on that?
Thanks, Kate, and thanks for NBC for having us. But I was really interested in just like, again, I feel like we're looking at two men telling like us what women are going to do, and I'm still not there. You know, I still feel like we need more representation. We need more of who I want to see. We need more people who can break down systemic differences that stop our government for either party being able to make effective policy. So after tonight, I still feel like a little unwary about exactly who I will be voting for, and if I will be voting at all.
And if you will be voting at all. Oh, you know, I'm sure both sides, both of those men would have said, please vote if you can. John.
I just want to add to that point, you know, again, we have two men discussing issues that have to do with women's rights and whatnot. But let's not forget that the person at the top of the ticket for the Democrats is a woman, and she has a lot to say, which maybe that will help.
And we know that you support Harris. John, I know quickly you also said the economic plans that you heard tonight cost a lot more than you expected.
Yeah, I was surprised to hear the price number that the Wharton School of Business attributed to Kamala's plan, but then when I heard that Trump's plan was 3 times that, I was pretty much shocked with that number.
Rona, you were considering voting for Trump now?
I didn't learn anything in this debate that kind of helped me reach a conclusion. I was really happy with both of their answers about Israel at the very beginning. But I had a crazy day today. I started this morning interviewing Aviva Siegel, former hostage whose husband, Keith Siegel, an American, is still held hostage in Gaza, along with another 6 Americans and over 100 others. And no one addressed that at all. No one addressed rising anti-Semitism on college campuses. I have more homework to do. Thanks.
I'm afraid we're out of time. Thank you all so much for sitting with us and for watching. Lester, I'll send it back to you guys.
Fascinating, Kate. Enjoyed the conversation.
All right, let's go back to Tom Yamas. He's in the spin room. Have you been spun, Tom?
Yeah. Well, I can tell you the spinning is just starting. The room is also starting to fill up now. I'm just looking over my shoulder to see who's here of the surrogates. We have Senator Tom Cotton is here, Representative Elise Stefanik, Governor Pritzker of Illinois, Senator Mark Kelly, and others. It sounds like we're also hearing our first sort of post-debate strategies. The Republicans are leaning into that moment that Hallie was talking about earlier, where Governor Walz was asked about his comments that were misleading about his time in China during the Tiananmen Square protest, that he called himself a knucklehead and that he misspoke. Republicans are going very hard over that. Democrats, in turn, are saying that the lies that the Vance campaign and the Trump campaign say are nowhere in comparison to that. We're also hearing a bigger debate right now about immigration. It sounds like both sides are fighting over immigration, what Vance said and what Walz said about their immigration plans, and who's to blame over the immigration crisis right now at the border and how it's changing. So I think we're sort of getting our first salvos in the war post-debate and what we're hearing here in the spin room. I also want to note we do see Secret Service in here, which leads us to believe that at least one of the 2 candidates who debated tonight will enter the spin room and hopefully do some interviews once they get done speaking to their own campaigns. For now, I'm going to send it to you guys as the spinning is just getting started.
All right. Thank you so much, Tom. I want to turn now to Kristen Welker, Hallie Jackson, and Peter Alexander has joined the table. Let's get some final thoughts. Peter, you're writing your story for the Today Show tomorrow. You literally are writing your story for the Today Show tomorrow. But what's the headline to you?
Well, I think one of the biggest headlines, at least in the eyes of the Walz campaign, came in the 90th minute. It was the most contentious moment of the debate. It was on the topic of democracy, an issue that Joe Biden focused so much attention on, but it seemed to be by the wayside as it became a Trump versus Harris race right now. According to the people I'm speaking to in the Harris-Walz camp right now, they say their dial groups, the folks who say if they like something or don't like it, thought that was the worst moment for J.D. Vance. They didn't like his non-answer, his refusal to say whether, in fact, Joe Biden defeated Donald Trump in 2020 right now. They're going to try to make some hay out of that. Right now, we're already seeing where the Trump people are trying to make hay out of. It was a gaffe by Tim Walz, who himself said sometimes he has a tendency to misspeak tonight when he said that he's friends with school shooters. He meant to say, of course, that he's friends with school shooting victims. But I do think that's a key moment, and certainly I think it's a moment where they think after a night where, in the eyes of the Walz folks, they think Vance came off a bit slick tonight, Yale educated. They thought that their guy, Walz, was a bit more plain spoken along the way. Again, I go back to where I started on this, though. It's not so much how you viewed what happened tonight, but it's how these are diced and sliced and how people see little moments from this tonight.
Yeah, what will people be talking about a few days from now?
Exactly
about
right.
This debate? Will they be talking about this debate?
Well, I do think that democracy thing is something that the Harris and Walz folks are going to try to lay into heavy out of this. They think it was their best moment over the course of the
But what about, let's talk about Walz's worst moment, which has to be, I would think, the part where he was asked about misstatements he's made about whether or not he was at Tiananmen Square in China, and he was sort of all over the place. Instead of just saying, look, I misspoke, and are we really talking about this thing that happened 35 years ago? So, but this are the kind of things that stick from debates like this. He said, I'm a knucklehead.
Absolutely. And Democrats reached out to say that was not a strong moment. It's worth noting this entire debate really seemed focused on trying to pin each other for being the incumbent. Remember, voters are looking for change.
Show hands who thinks there's going to be another debate. Nobody.
After
what about you, Lester?
Think either side, I'll leave it to you guys. You don't think there's a chance that they're going to feel they need it?
We've covered Donald Trump for a long time. There's always a chance, but right now it doesn't look like it.
Well, that concludes our coverage of tonight's vice presidential debate.
We will have more coverage ahead on our streaming network, NBC News Now. Full wrap-up tomorrow on Today.